Tonight we enter the quiet rooms where clay remembers what human voices forgot. You stand at the edge of southern Mesopotamia, not beneath moonlit fantasy, but beside real earth, real fragments, and real names impressed into mud before history learned to speak confidently. In the late 19th century, archaeologists working in the ruins of ancient cities found thousands of tablets, many now preserved in museums and universities. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania have spent generations reading those signs, one wedge at a time, while journals such as Nature and Science continue to reshape the deeper timeline of early urban life. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the night settles around you, write your location and local time in the comments, so somewhere in the dark, another listener may know they are not alone. You're not asked to believe too quickly. That would be rude, honestly. And history already has enough overconfident people waving swords in badly lit rooms. Instead, you're invited to listen slowly, as though the tablets are being lifted from the dust in front of you, one by one, carefully, quietly. The central mystery is simple, yet it opens like a door under the ground. What did the Sumerians think happened after the gods were no longer near, not gone? Perhaps not dead, not erased from memory, but distant, withdrawn, speaking through signs instead of voices, through dreams instead of footsteps, through disasters instead of commands. You can feel the unease in that idea. A world once imagined as ordered by divine presence begins to rely on human hands, human rulers, human scribes, and human fear. The clay tablets do not give one clean answer. Ancient records rarely behave that politely. They preserve hymns, king lists, temple accounts, myths, laments, legal cases, and school exercises where tired students copied old words with imperfect patience. Records confirm that Sumerian cities such as Uruk, Nippur, Eridu, and Lagash were not vague legends, but real communities with administrators, priests, workers, canals, storehouses, and temples. Their lives were practical, earthy, and crowded with obligations. Yet inside those practical records something stranger breathes. You find gods who once walked close to kings. You find cities believed to belong to particular divine powers. You find kingship described as something lowered from heaven, as if rule itself was not invented in a palace, but delivered into the human world. Then, slowly, the old closeness changes. The gods are still named. Their statues are fed. Their temples are repaired. Their festivals continue. But the tone darkens, like a lamp burning low in a corridor. Perhaps this is what makes Sumer so haunting. It does not simply tell of gods arriving. It also hints at gods withdrawing. Your mind drifts toward a tablet resting behind glass. It is small enough to hold, though no careful curator would let you test that theory. Its surface is the colour of baked earth after rain has dried. Across it, the wedge marks lie in rows, severe and delicate at once. They seem less like writing than tiny wounds made by a reed stylus. Each mark is a decision. Each line is a voice refusing to vanish. The scent around you is imagined, but not impossible. Warm dust, sun-dried clay, a trace of bitumen, the faint musk of reeds from the marshlands where rivers once slowed and split. Outside the museum case, electric lights hum. Inside the ancient surface, another world remains stubbornly awake. A mainstream historical fact guides you gently here. Excavations in southern Iraq revealed that Sumerian writing began as a tool for administration, especially counting goods, labour, grain, animals, and offerings. Scholars from major American institutions have shown how economic records and temple management helped shape early writing. That is less glamorous than a god-whispering poetry. Yes, but it is far more human. The first written worlds were built from barley, sheep, jars, debts, rations, and names. And then, because history enjoys complicating every tidy explanation, those same writing systems carried myths of cosmic order. The same hands that counted beer also copied stories of creation, divine councils, sacred cities, and vanished ages. A scribe might spend 1 hour listing grain deliveries, then another hour copying a hymn to a goddess whose anger could empty a city. Ancient office work, it turns out, had better atmosphere than ours. A quirky tidbit lingers near the edge of the evidence. Some later traditions claimed that knowledge came to early cities through semi-divine sages associated with the deep waters. They were not quite gods, not quite ordinary men, and not exactly the sort of guests you would invite to a sensible dinner. Fringe writers have made too much noise about them, as fringe writers tend to do after discovering a dramatic hat. Still, the ancient motif itself is real enough as a piece of mythic memory. It shows that Mesopotamian culture imagined wisdom as something handed down from beyond ordinary human life. That matters. Not because it proves hidden visitors or lost machines or any such midnight circus. It matters because the Sumerians themselves pictured civilization as inherited. Their cities were not merely built, they were received. Their rituals were not merely invented, they were entrusted. Their kings did not simply command. They stood beneath a structure older than themselves. Here the open debate begins to breathe softly. Some scholars argue that divine withdrawal reflects political trauma, especially the fall of cities, environmental stress, and foreign conquest. Others suggest it expresses a deeper religious pattern, where gods remain powerful precisely because they are unreachable. Research discussions at universities such as Chicago, Yale, and Oxford continue to ask whether these texts preserve theology, royal propaganda, ritual memory, or all of these at once. You walk deeper into the question, and the ground grows older under your feet. The land itself seems to answer in textures rather than words. Mud brick walls crumble back into the plain. Canal beds curve like faint scars through the soil. The rivers carry silt, as they always have, indifferent to kings and gods alike. In the distance, a temple platform rises above the flatness, not tall by modern measure, but commanding in a world of reed huts, fields, cattle, and heat. You imagine standing there at dusk. The air cools only slightly. Sand sticks to your ankles. Somewhere, a worker closes a wooden door. Somewhere else, a priest washes hands before entering a sacred room where the god is present through a statue dressed, perfumed, and fed. The rituals continue because they must. That is the frightening thing about absence. It does not stop the work. It makes the work more urgent. The Sumerian records reveal no single moment when the gods leave. There is no farewell carved neatly into clay. Instead, there are patterns. A city falls, and a lament says its god has abandoned it. A king boasts, and a hymn insists divine favour has chosen him. A flood story remembers destruction from above, while human survival depends on warning, obedience, and a fragile boat. A list of kings stretches back into impossible reigns, then narrows slowly into ordinary time, long before recorded history became comfortable with dates. Sumerian memory opened onto a deeper, stranger past. In that past, rulers lived for lengths that no body could endure. Cities were founded under divine authority. Wisdom came from a realm beneath or beyond the visible world. Then something changed, and humans inherited the burden of managing what the gods had ordered. Perhaps that is why these tablets feel unsettling in the quiet hours. They do not merely say that ancient people believed in gods, and that part is easy. They suggest a world coping with distance from the sacred, a world where divine order remains, but divine nearness fades, a world where humanity must keep repairing temples, writing lists, making offerings, and pretending the silence is not as large as it feels. You look again at the clay. It is not glamorous, it is not golden, it does not shine like treasure from a royal tomb. It is brown, cracked, and patient. Yet inside it lies an enormous human question. What happens when the powers that gave meaning to the world seem to step back? The Sumerians answered with ritual, they answered with kings, they answered with writing, they answered with memory, and beneath those answers you sense something even older, almost like a breath held in the dark. Perhaps the gods did not vanish. Perhaps they became harder to hear. Your mind drifts southward, toward a land where the sky seems too wide for comfort. There are no mountains to hold the horizon in place, no forest to soften the light, only the broad alluvial plain between the great rivers. The earth is flat, wet, shining in places, cracked in others. Reeds shiver along the marshes, and the wind carries the smell of mud, fish, cattle, and baked brick. This is not a dead landscape. It is difficult, generous, and demanding. The land gives grain, but only after channels are cut, banks are repaired, fields are measured, and water is persuaded to behave. A careless canal can ruin a season. A broken levee can drown a village. A shift in the river can make yesterday's wealth into tomorrow's salt crust. You begin to understand why order mattered here. Order was not a luxury. It was survival. You stand near the edge of a settlement at sunrise. The air is already warm. A dog moves between low houses. A child carries a basket that looks too large for their arms. Somewhere, a potter turns clay with steady fingers, while smoke climbs from a kiln in a thin grey thread. The city is not silent, but its noise is low and practical. Sandals scrape. Donkeys complain. Reeds rustle. A door hinge squeaks like a small exhausted bird. The cities beneath this dust were built from mud brick, and mud brick is a humble material with heroic ambitions. It can rise into walls, platforms, houses, shrines, and storerooms. But it never forgets the rain. It softens. It cracks. It returns to earth unless someone repairs it. That simple fact shaped the look of Sumerian life. Their cities were always being rebuilt, raised upon their own ruins, layered like memory pressed into soil. Archaeology confirms that settlements in southern Mesopotamia grew into some of the world's earliest urban centers during the 4th millennium before the Common Era. Research associated with institutions such as the University of Chicago, Cambridge, and Pennsylvania has helped reconstruct the growth of places like Uruk, where administration, craft production, temple activity, and long-distance exchange became remarkably complex. In calm terms, that means many people learn to live together in one place, disagree about everything, and still move grain around. Civilization, apparently, has always required paperwork. For a moment, it feels as though you can see Uruk from a distance. Its walls rise pale against the morning glare. Its sacred precincts stand higher than ordinary houses. People approach along packed paths, bringing wool, fish, grain, dates, jars, animals, and labour. They come not merely to trade, but to be counted, blessed, taxed, organised, and watched. A city is a machine made of people, and in Sumer the machine had a sacred centre. The temple is not just a place of prayer, it is warehouse, employer, kitchen, archive, symbol, and stage. Its courtyards smell of flour, oil, beer, wet clay, and animal hair. Its officials track rations, its workers maintain fields, its priests tend the divine image. Its scribes press signs into tablets with the seriousness of people who know that a missing number can create trouble faster than a demon in a bad mood. That sacred machine changes how you imagine the gods. They are not floating decorations above the city. They are owners, patrons, and invisible landlords. The fields may belong to a god. The herds may belong to a goddess. The city itself may be understood as part of a divine household. Human beings live, work, eat, argue, and marry inside an economy where heaven is written into clay accounts. Yet the ground still feels unstable. Not every scholar agrees on exactly how temple power worked in the earlier cities. Some argue that temples directed major parts of the economy. Others caution that households, kin groups, local leaders, and private activity were also important. The debate remains open in university seminars and excavation reports because ancient mud does not always arrange itself into modern categories. It prefers to be difficult, very ancient of it. You walk through a narrow street where house walls lean close together. The walls are cool in the shade, rough beneath your fingertips, patched with fresh clay where cracks have opened. There is a smell of bread baking somewhere nearby. A woman grinds grain with slow pressure. A man repairs a reed mat. A scribe's apprentice whispers signs under his breath, trying to remember which wedge belongs where. Life here is not all kings and omens. It is teeth worn down by gritty flour. It is water jars balanced on hips. It is the sharp sweetness of dates and the sour smell of beer mash. It is the soft slap of wet clay shaped into bricks, then laid under the sun. It is sleep on rooftops during hot nights, when the stars look bright enough to be messages, if only someone knew how to read them properly. A quirky detail survives from daily Mesopotamian life. Beer was not a minor pleasure, but a normal ration and offering, thick enough in some contexts to be drunk through straws that helped avoid floating husks. The image is oddly intimate. Ancient workers, priests, and officials sharing beer from jars while the city breathes around them. For all the grandeur of gods and temples, the past often returns with foam on its lip. Beyond the houses, the fields spread in long measured strips. Irrigation channels glimmer under the light. Men and women work in teams, bending, lifting, carrying, cutting. Their labour feeds the city, and the city returns protection, identity, ritual, and obligation. No one here lives outside the system for very long. The river, the field, the temple, the ruler, the scribe, and the god are joined together, not always gently. The landscape itself teaches dependence. Too little water and the crops fail. Too much water and the walls melt. Too much salt and the soil weakens year after year. Modern environmental studies have explored how salinization affected southern Mesopotamian agriculture, especially where irrigation left minerals behind in the fields. The details remain debated, with some scholars stressing ecological strain and others emphasizing political choices, trade shifts, and changing settlement patterns. You sense the hidden timeline beneath these problems. The cities appear solid, but they are temporary arrangements against water, heat, and forgetting. Each wall is a negotiation, each canal is a promise, each harvest is a small victory over chaos. In such a world, the gods do not feel distant at first. They feel necessary. A faint bell sound reaches your imagination, though no bronze bell is needed for the scene. It is only the echo of order calling people into motion. A gate opens, a cart creaks. A priest steps across a threshold freshly swept. In the temple courtyard, someone pours water over hands. Cleanliness matters where the sacred is near. The body must be prepared. The room must be prepared. Even the air seems to hold itself carefully. You begin to feel why these cities could be remembered as places where divine and human worlds touched. They rose from mud, yet pointed upward. They depended on irrigation, yet spoke of heaven. They fed gods who did not eat like humans, served statues that were more than statues, and recorded offerings as if the unseen world had an account book. The dust beneath your feet is not empty. It is powdered architecture, broken vessels, old hearths, lost seals, collapsed roofs, and the quiet remains of meals no one remembers sharing. Every step crosses someone's vanished morning. Every mound hides a street. Every street once led toward a centre where the city believed its god might still be reached. And in that belief, the first unease waits patiently. A city can build a temple. It can fill storerooms, train scribes, repair walls, and sing hymns. It can prepare a room for the divine presence with oil, cloth, incense, and food, but it cannot command nearness. In your ears, the echo changes into the murmur of a court where power is not yet ordinary. You're standing near a raised platform, with packed earth beneath your feet and a ceiling of woven reeds above your head. The room is dim, but not empty. Men in fringed garments stand with careful posture. A servant holds a vessel. A scribe waits with damp clay. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city sweats beneath the sun. The ruler enters not as a private man, but as a living answer to a sacred question. Why should one person command many? Why should fields, workers, temples, guards, boats, and storehouses bend toward a single voice? The Sumerian imagination answered with a powerful idea. Kingship was not merely taken, it was given. More precisely, it was lowered from heaven as if authority descended into the human world like a weight wrapped in light. That phrase comes from an ancient tradition preserved in the Sumerian king list. The list presents kingship as something that came down from heaven, then moved from city to city through a sequence of rulers and dynasties. It is not a modern history book, and it does not wish to be one. It is part memory, part theology, part political claim, and part strange old map of legitimacy. Still, records confirm that Sumerian cities did develop complex political offices, with rulers overseeing warfare, construction, diplomacy, and religious duties. You feel the importance of that claim as the ruler takes his place. He does not stand alone. Behind him are gods, ancestors, temple estates, scribes, labour crews, and the city's fear of disorder. His body is human, but his office touches something larger. That is convenient for him, naturally. Power has always enjoyed a divine costume when one is available. Yet the costume is not only deception. People in these cities live in a world where the sacred and practical are braided together. A canal is practical, but its failure can feel like divine anger. A victory is military, but also a sign of favour. A harvest is agricultural. Yet it depends on forces no farmer can fully control. To rule such a world, a king must seem capable of negotiating with both mud and heaven. You watch the scribe press the stylus into clay. The marks are small, but they hold enormous consequences. A decree may assign workers to a canal. A record may list offerings for a temple. An inscription may declare that a ruler built a shrine for a god, restored sacred order, defeated enemies, or protected widows and orphans. Royal language likes to sound generous. It often does this while arranging more labour. A mainstream historical fact settles into the room. In early Mesopotamia, rulers often presented themselves as chosen by major deities and responsible for maintaining order through building projects, justice, warfare, and ritual care. Scholars at institutions such as Yale, Stanford, and the Oriental Institute at Chicago have studied inscriptions where rulers tie political authority to divine approval. The result is not simple kingship, it is kingship under observation, surrounded by gods who bless, punish, withdraw, or remain terribly quiet. The throne is not comfortable in this imagination. It rests on favour, and favour can move. The old records often describe power passing between cities. First one city holds kingship, then another, Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, Shurupak, Kish, Uruk, and others appear like lamps lit across a dark plain. The divine gift does not belong permanently to any one place. It travels, it chooses, it abandons. That is the beginning of unease. You can hear sandals shifting on the packed floor. You can smell wool warmed by bodies, clay drying in the corner, and oil burning in a little lamp. The ruler speaks of restoration, but restoration implies damage. He speaks of justice, but justice implies complaint. He speaks of divine favour, but favour must be announced because it can be doubted. In the Sumerian world, kingship is never just a crown placed on a head. It is a structure of belief that must be rebuilt through ceremony. The ruler offers to the gods, builds for the gods, receives titles from the gods, and sometimes claims a closeness that ordinary people cannot approach. The city watches carefully. It has to. Everyone's grain, water, walls, and sons may depend on whether this man's relationship with the divine world is real enough. A quirky or fringe tidbit waits beside the more careful evidence. Some later legends made early kings seem almost superhuman, giving them reigns lasting tens of thousands of years before the flood. This does not mean anyone found a king with knees durable enough for a 28,000-year administration. That would be a truly unfair retirement plan. Instead, those impossible spans reveal how memory stretches when it looks backward into sacred time. The farther away the ruler, the larger he becomes. The debate remains open among scholars. Some interpret the long reigns as symbolic expressions of an age before normal history, when divine order operated differently. Others see them as political exaggeration, scribal tradition, numerical patterning, or a way of giving ancient cities prestige. Discussions at Oxford, Harvard, and Chicago continue to treat the Sumerian king list as both a historical source and a crafted ideological text. It is useful, but it does not surrender easily. The court fades, and you find yourself outside under a pale sky. A procession moves toward the temple. Musicians play pipes and drums with a slow, repeating rhythm. People stand along the way, not cheering wildly, but watching with the alertness of those who know ceremony matters. A statue of a god may be carried or approached. Offerings may be prepared. The ruler may bow, pour, lift, or speak. Here. Kingship becomes visible. Not an abstract system, but a movement through streets. It has sound, scent, dust, and weight. It passes close enough for a child to see the fringe of the ruler's garment. It passes close enough for an old woman to wonder whether the gods still approve. It passes close enough for a labourer to remember tomorrow's canal work and sigh inwardly, because heaven always seems to need strong backs. The system reveal begins to appear. There are gods above cities, kings beneath gods, priests guarding ritual, scribes fixing memory, workers sustaining the whole structure, and enemies waiting beyond the fields. Each part depends on the others. The king stands at the crossing point. He is not a god in the earlier Sumerian pattern, but he is not merely an official either. He is a hinge between the seen and unseen. That hinge can creak. When the gods are imagined as close, the king's role is intense but clear. He serves them. He builds their houses. He receives their favour. He directs the city according to a sacred order older than himself. But when divine nearness becomes uncertain, the king must do more than serve. He must persuade. He must prove. He must make absence look like continued blessing. You sense how this changes the air around power. A ruler who truly hears the gods can command with confidence. A ruler who only claims to hear them must surround himself with ritual, inscription, victory, and performance. The difference may be impossible to see from the street. That is the problem. The clay records preserve this tension without explaining it away. They show rulers as builders, shepherds, warriors, chosen servants, beloved of gods, restorers of order. Yet every claim of favour casts the shadow of possible rejection. Every temple rebuilt hints that a temple once fell. Every boast of divine selection whispers that another city was not selected anymore. Perhaps that is why kingship descends from heaven in the ancient list. Instead of rising naturally from the crowd, it must come from elsewhere because human authority alone feels too fragile. Left to itself, power is just one person asking many people to obey. With heaven behind it, power becomes destiny. Or at least, it hopes to. You stand at the edge of the procession as dust settles on your skin. The ruler passes into the temple precinct, and the doorway receives him. For a moment, the crowd cannot see what happens inside. That hidden space is everything. The city waits outside, breathing softly while one human figure enters the house of the unseen, and there, in the cool dark, kingship listens for an answer. For a moment, it feels as though the temple itself has begun to listen. You stand in the inner court where voices soften without being commanded. The walls are thick, the air cooler, and the floor has been swept until the dust lies in obedient corners. Oil smoke curls upward from a shallow lamp. Its scent is bitter and faintly sweet, like something preserved too long in darkness. This is the place where nearness should happen. The divine image stands within its chamber, dressed, adorned, and treated not as decoration, but as presence. Food is brought, water is poured, hands are washed, words are spoken in careful order, cloth is changed, doors open and close with deliberate rhythm. The god is served as a great lord would be served. Though the room remains strangely still, you feel the tension in that stillness. Everything has been prepared for arrival, yet nothing visibly arrives. The ritual continues because the ritual is the bridge. Without it, the silence might become too large to bear. A city can survive hunger for a while. It can survive bad weather, taxes, and very serious officials with clay tablets. But sacred silence is different. It asks whether the pattern still holds. Sumerian religion did not describe the gods as absent in every ordinary sense. They had names, houses, families, powers, tempers, symbols, and cities. Their images were washed, clothed, fed, and honoured. Their festivals filled streets with movement. Yet the records also preserve moments when gods withdraw their protection, abandon cities, or allow disaster to unfold. Divine presence becomes conditional, fragile, and sometimes frighteningly indirect. A mainstream historical fact steadies the scene. Mesopotamian cult statues were understood as more than representations, and temple rituals cared for them as living embodiments of divine presence. Scholars at the University of Pennsylvania, Chicago, and Oxford have examined how daily offerings, purification, and ceremonial service sustained the relationship between god and city. The god's statue remained in the temple, but that did not guarantee divine favour forever. That distinction matters. Presence is not the same as protection. A name can remain while mercy departs. A statue can stand while the city falls. A hymn can praise while the fields dry and enemies gather at the gate. The Sumerian mind did not always solve this contradiction. It carried it, like a jar filled to the rim. You hear a priest murmur. The words are low, almost swallowed by the walls. He knows the sequence. He knows which vessel is lifted first, which offering is placed, which gesture must not be neglected. Repetition gives comfort, but it also reveals anxiety. Humans repeat what they fear losing. They polish doors. They repaint shrines. They mend robes. They count offerings. They say the old names again. It is possible that divine withdrawal was not imagined as one dramatic departure, but as a thinning of certainty. The gods move from direct rulers of cosmic and civic order into powers approached through signs. Dreams matter, omens matter, birth defects in animals matter. A strange storm matters. The liver of a sacrificed sheep becomes a map where anxious specialists search for heavenly grammar. Quite a burden for a sheep, honestly. This is where a quirky tidbit enters quietly. Mesopotamian diviners developed elaborate systems for reading the livers of sacrificial animals, and clay models of livers were used for instruction. To a modern listener, it may sound peculiar, even theatrical. Yet for ancient scholars, the liver was not nonsense. It was a surface where the gods might write without speaking. When voices fade, surfaces become important. The open scholarly debate takes shape in the shadows. Some historians view these practices as highly organised intellectual systems, not superstition in the lazy modern sense. Others emphasise how omen traditions helped royal courts manage uncertainty, especially during war, famine, illness, and political crisis. Researchers at Yale, Harvard, and the University of Chicago continue to ask whether omens were primarily religious communication, statecraft, psychological control, or all of these braided together. You look again toward the inner chamber. The god is near, officially. The god is served, materially. Yet every action admits that something must be maintained. Divine closeness requires labour. It requires clean hands, correct words, full storehouses, trained personnel, and a ruler able to support the temple. The sacred is powerful, but it is also strangely dependent on human care. That is unsettling. A god who needs clothing and meals is not weak in the ancient understanding. The service is a privilege, a sign that the city participates in cosmic order. But the arrangement leaves room for fear. What if the offering is insufficient? What if a ritual error has gone unnoticed? What if the god is offended by pollution, injustice, or neglect? What if the god has already turned away, and the temple staff are only feeding absence? Outside, the city moves through the afternoon. Bakers slap dough against hot surfaces. Donkeys stand with the moral disappointment common to donkeys in every age. Children chase one another near a wall patched with new mud. Merchants argue over measures. A woman washes a bowl beside a canal, dipping and lifting, while water flashes under the sun. Ordinary life does not stop for metaphysical worry. That may be its greatest courage. People still need bread. They still need water jars filled, wool spun, fields weeded, boats loaded, marriages arranged, and debts remembered. The gods may be distant, but rent has never been shy. Yet the temple dominates the skyline and the imagination. Its raised platform says that the city is not merely a crowd. It is aligned with heaven. Its storerooms say that offerings still flow upward. Its rituals say that communication remains possible. The structure itself argues against abandonment, but texts of lament and destruction tell another truth. When a city is defeated, ancient poets may say its protective deity has left, not because the deity stopped existing, but because the bond between God and place has been broken. The divine household has been emptied. The sacred bed is cold. The temple no longer smells of fresh offerings, but of ash, dust, and wind. Long before recorded history hardened into firm chronology, this idea gave shape to catastrophe. A city did not fall only because soldiers breached walls. It fell because order had been withdrawn from it. The human and divine worlds had slipped out of alignment. Bricks collapsed because blessing had already gone. Your hand touches a cold door latch in the imagined temple corridor. The metal feels out of place among mud brick and reed, but the sensation holds. A threshold is a serious thing. On one side is the public world of sunlight and grain. On the other side is the curated darkness where the unseen is served. To cross it is to admit that humans need mediation. They cannot simply summon the gods into the street. That need creates a system. Priests maintain the doorway, kings fund the house, scribes record the offerings, workers produce the goods, diviners interpret the signs, singers preserve the hymns. The entire city becomes a listening device built around divine distance. Every profession, in some way, helps keep the silence from becoming final. Perhaps the gods withdraw, not by leaving space, but by leaving certainty. They remain in names, statues, stars, storms, and dreams. They remain in institutions. They remain in fear, yet they no longer stand before humanity as obvious companions. Their will must be inferred. Their anger must be guessed. Their favour must be advertised, defended, and renewed. You pause beneath the doorway while oil smoke thickens the air. The temple does not feel empty. Not exactly. It feels expectant, which may be more unsettling. Something has been invited. Something has been prepared for. Something may answer, or may not. And in that waiting, human history becomes heavier. Your thoughts settle inside a palace courtyard where shade is never accidental. Reed mats hang from wooden beams, filtering the white glare into bands of dusty gold. Servants cross the open space with jars, baskets, folded cloth, and the practiced quiet of people who understand that powerful rooms have ears. Somewhere nearby, a bronze tool strikes stone. The sound is small, patient, and ceremonial. Here, human rule tries to become permanent. The king sits where everyone can see him, yet not too easily. That is part of the art. Authority must be visible enough to impress, distant enough to feel larger than ordinary life, and busy enough that no one notices how much it depends on belief. His garments are finer than those around him. His beard may be carefully arranged. His attendants move in patterns that make him seem almost still. Yet beneath all this control, the problem remains. If divine nearness has become harder to know, then kings must make certainty visible. They build walls, they dig canals, they restore temples, they commission inscriptions, they judge disputes, they lead armies, they distribute offerings, they turn their reigns into proof because silence from heaven leaves room for suspicion on earth. You see a slab being prepared for words, the surface waits. A scribe studies the ruler's title, the name of the god, the list of achievements, the careful phrases of devotion. Royal inscriptions are not casual notes. They are monuments in language. They tell future readers that the king was chosen, beloved, mighty, just, obedient, victorious, and deeply interested in construction projects. Ancient rulers did adore a good building boast. A mainstream historical fact enters through those inscriptions. Sumerian and later Mesopotamian kings frequently used building texts to declare that they restored temples and acted on behalf of the gods. Scholars at institutions such as Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have studied these inscriptions as evidence for political theology, royal propaganda, and real administrative labour. A temple rebuilt in words may also have been rebuilt in brick, though the words often polish the mud quite nicely. The palace and temple do not stand apart as modern categories would prefer. They lean into each other. The king needs the god's approval, and the temple needs royal resources. Priests require offerings, repairs, workers, and protection. Kings require ceremonies, titles, omens, and the enormous dignity that comes from standing near sacred things without being struck down. You walk past a storeroom where jars are sealed with impressed clay. The seal marks show ownership and authority. A door opens, and the smell of grain rises in a dry, living cloud. Barley is political, oil is political, wool is political. Beer is definitely political, which explains more about history than anyone wants to admit at dinner. Whoever controls storage controls labour, festivals, armies, and survival during bad years. After the gods grow distant in human imagination, the king becomes the most important visible manager of invisible order. He cannot replace the gods, not fully. That would be dangerous language in many periods, but he can stand where the city needs someone to stand. He can be the shepherd, the builder, the judge, the warrior, the caretaker of temples, the one who keeps the channels clear and the enemies nervous. You enter a judgment space, where people bring disputes with tired eyes. A boundary has been moved, a debt has been denied, a field has been damaged, a marriage contract has soured, a worker has not received expected rations. The king, or officials acting under his authority, must transform complaint into order. Law is not merely written rule, it is a ritual of repair. Records confirm that ancient Mesopotamian societies preserved legal and administrative texts dealing with property, labour, family, debt, and compensation. Although the famous later law collections are not purely Sumerian in every layer, they belong to a long southern Mesopotamian tradition of making order visible through written norms. Research at Harvard, Pennsylvania, and Chicago has shown how these texts reveal practical life as much as royal ideals. A strange tenderness appears here. The king's grand claims are heavy, sometimes exhausting, but the disputes are small and human. A widow needs protection. A field boundary matters because grain matters. A debt matters because hunger waits behind it. A broken agreement can disturb an entire household. Divine order is not only cosmic, it is also whether someone receives barley on time. Still, law cannot silence doubt. A ruler may judge fairly one morning and send men to die that afternoon. He may repair a temple while collecting labour from exhausted villages. He may call himself shepherd, though sheep rarely get to vote on shepherding arrangements. The ancient world understood this tension, even when royal language tried to smooth it. The open scholarly debate becomes sharper here. Some historians interpret royal justice claims as sincere expressions of duty within sacred kingship. Others see them as strategic messages meant to control elites, cities, and temple networks. Researchers at Stanford, Chicago, and Oxford continue to ask how much these inscriptions reflect lived governance, and how much they create an image of order for audiences who needed reassurance. Outside the palace, workers haul baskets of earth for a canal project. Their shoulders shine with sweat. The mud clings to their legs. A supervisor calls out numbers while a scribe marks assignments. Water management is not poetic, but without it, the city weakens. In southern Mesopotamia, a king who cannot manage canals is a king arguing with geography, and geography is famously unmoved by speeches. The river does not care about royal titles. The line of labourers stretches across the heat. Some are dependent workers attached to institutions. Some may be corvée labourers fulfilling obligations. Some may be specialists. The categories shift across time and place, but the pattern remains. Royal power becomes real through bodies moving earth. A canal in the plain is a political document written with baskets, saw backs, and water. A quirky tidbit glows at the edge of palace life. Some rulers used foundation deposits, placing objects such as figurines, inscribed cones, or symbolic items within buildings. These hidden things were not meant for ordinary viewing. They were messages to gods, future kings, or perhaps to the building itself. Humans have always enjoyed hiding notes in walls. The Mesopotamians simply did it with better cosmic paperwork. You follow the king into a temple restoration ceremony. Bricks are lifted with care. A first brick may be moulded ceremonially. The ruler participates, perhaps carrying a basket of earth on his head, in a gesture of humility before the god. The image is carefully staged, yet powerful. The highest man performs labour before the divine, showing that his command is founded on service. That gesture reveals the system more clearly. The king cannot merely dominate. He must submit upward, command downward, and appear necessary in both directions. To the gods, he is servant. To the people, he is shepherd. To enemies, he is storm. To scribes, he is a very busy source of titles. Each identity supports the others, until power begins to look like architecture. But architecture cracks. If a harvest fails, people may wonder. If enemies burn fields, people may whisper. If omens are bad, the palace grows tense. If a city falls, later voices may say its god abandoned it. The king then becomes not only ruler, but possible explanation. His virtue, ritual correctness, and divine favour become matters of survival. This is how human rule grows heavier after divine distance. The gods still stand above the system, but the king stands where people can point. He becomes the face of order, and also the face of failure. He carries offerings upward and blame downward. He's necessary, honoured, watched, and quietly feared. Your fingertips brush the rough edge of a carved stone. It is cool in the shade. The inscription praises a ruler who built, restored, conquered, and obeyed. The words are confident, almost too confident. They push against time, insisting that this reign mattered, that this man held the pattern together, that heaven still approved what earth was doing. The courtyard darkens as evening settles. Lamps are lit along the palace wall. The scent of oil smoke returns, mingling with baked bread and dust. Somewhere, the city exhales after labour. Somewhere, A scribe sets aside a tablet to dry, and beneath the calm claims of kings, you feel the older question waiting. When the gods no longer speak plainly, who dares to speak for them? The scent reaches you before the room appears. It is cedar oil, old wool, damp clay, and something sharper, perhaps resin warming near a lamp. You enter the temple complex not through the grand doorway of public ceremony, but through the working passages where sacred service becomes daily labour. The walls are plain here. The floor is worn smooth by many feet. Somewhere nearby, water is being poured into a basin with careful, repeated splashes. Priests guard the absence, though no one would phrase it so bluntly. They guard the god's house, the god's meals, the god's clothing, the god's calendar, the god's songs, and the god's silence. Their work is not occasional. It is a pattern of hours, offerings, washings, account-keeping, purifications, and recitations. In this world, faith does not float above ordinary life. It has storerooms, schedules, personnel, and rather strict expectations about cleanliness. You stand beside a low table where flour has been measured. A jar of oil waits nearby. Woolen textiles are folded with attention. Clay tags and ceilings mark the movement of goods through the institution. Nothing feels random. The temple breathes through procedure. Every object has a place. Every day has obligations. And every obligation tries to keep the line open between the city and the divine. A mainstream historical fact settles into these corridors. Temples in Sumerian cities were major ritual and economic institutions, employing administrators, singers, cooks, cleaners, craftsmen, shepherds, and scribes. Research from the University of Chicago, Yale, Oxford, and Pennsylvania has shown that temple archives preserve complex systems of offerings, labour, land management, and distribution. The sacred was not only believed, it was managed. This management may sound unromantic. That is because modern people often expect mystery to arrive without paperwork. Ancient Mesopotamia politely disagrees. A god's household required bread, beer, meat, oil, incense, textiles, vessels, and trained servants. The divine presence was honoured through material care. The invisible world received visible things, and humans recorded the transaction with a seriousness that makes modern receipts look spiritually underdressed. Your fingertips graze a woven curtain. The fabric feels rough and heavy. Beyond it, a more restricted space waits. Perhaps a chamber where only certain personnel may enter. Thresholds matter here. Not everyone approaches the divine image. Not every voice speaks the sacred words. The temple is a graded world, arranged by access. The closer one moves toward the inner room, the more controlled the body becomes. You hear a singer practicing. The melody is low, repetitive, and slightly nasal, rising and falling like wind along a reed fence. Temple singers preserved hymns, laments, and ritual songs that addressed gods with praise, petition, grief, and longing. Their voices did not simply decorate worship. They shaped emotion into a form the divine world might recognize. When speech alone seemed too small, music stretched it. In another room, a scribe lists deliveries, barley, oil, sheep, dates, textiles, names, quantities. The reed stylus presses, lifts, turns, and presses again. Each mark is modest, but the archive grows into memory. A temple without records would be like a body without nerves. Goods would move, but not be remembered. Promises would be made, but not held. Offerings would vanish into smoke without leaving a clay shadow behind. A quirky tidbit waits among these sacred routines. Some Mesopotamian temple personnel were involved in rituals for calming or soothing divine anger, including ceremonies that treated statues, instruments, and spaces as participants in a delicate relationship. It is a strangely intimate thought. A whole city might worry that a god was offended, while specialists work to repair the mood of heaven. Ancient customer service. But with thunder in the complaint department, the scholarly debate remains lively and careful. Some researchers interpret temple archives as evidence of centralized economic power, with temples controlling large resources and dependent workers. Others warn that surviving tablets may overrepresent institutions because institutions preserved records better than ordinary households. Scholars at Stanford, Harvard, and Oxford continue to ask how far temple power reached into everyday life, and how much remains hidden because private lives left fewer tablets. You move into a courtyard washed in pale afternoon light. A priest steps from one basin to another, water running from his fingers. Purity is not a vague feeling here. It is enacted through washing, separation, controlled movement, and correct handling of sacred objects. Dust, blood, illness, sexual contact, death, and improper behavior could all belong to categories of danger, depending on ritual context. The body is a border that must be managed. This is not because ancient people disliked bodies. Their world is earthy, sensual, crowded, and practical. They know sweat, childbirth, wounds, desire, hunger, and fatigue. Yet the divine household requires order. To enter certain spaces, the human body must become less chaotic. Washing is a small ceremony of becoming acceptable. The water slips across skin as if removing not only dirt, but disorder itself. You pass a kitchen area where offerings are prepared. The smell is warm and rich. Bread browns near heat. Meat may be portioned. Beer is stored. Oil shines in bowls. These foods are presented to the god, then often redistributed within human networks. The meal of the divine household becomes part of the social and economic life of the temple. Nothing is wasted when institutions are watching. The system reveals itself through repetition. Priests do not replace vanished certainty with argument. They replace it with rhythm, morning offering, evening offering, monthly festival, yearly procession, washing, clothing, feeding, singing, recording, sealing, opening doors, closing doors. The routine says that the relationship continues even when no heavenly voice interrupts the air. There is comfort in that. There is also fear. If the ritual stops, what then? If offerings fail, does the god depart? If the temple is polluted, does protection weaken? If invaders carry away the divine statue, is the city spiritually emptied? Mesopotamian texts from different periods show deep concern over the removal, loss, restoration, and return of cult images. A god could be present through an image, yet that image could be captured. The sacred could be both cosmic and vulnerable. That vulnerability makes the priests essential. They are guardians of continuity. They hold old procedures in trained memory. They know which days are dangerous, which offerings are suitable, which omens require action, which hymns soothe, and which mistakes must be corrected quickly. Their authority comes not from loud command, but from expertise in fragile things. You imagine a young novice learning the temple calendar. He's sleepy, nervous, and probably hungry. His teacher corrects him sharply when he forgets a sequence. The boy's fingers smell of clay and oil. He repeats the names of gods until they become rhythm rather than information. In time, he may learn that sacred work is not constant awe. Much of it is careful repetition, and much repetition is done while one's feet hurt. The human role becomes clearer in these halls. People were not created merely to admire the gods from a distance. In Mesopotamian mythic thought, humans often exist to perform labour that sustains divine order. The temple turns that idea into architecture. The god has a house. Humans keep it functioning. The cosmos has hierarchy. Humans enact it with bread, water, cloth, song, and numbers. Yet the priests also preserve a question they cannot fully answer. They can tend the statue, but not command the god behind it. They can read signs, but not force clarity. They can sing laments, but not guarantee mercy. Their entire profession stands between effort and uncertainty. That is why their work feels both powerful and humble. Evening approaches, the courtyard cools. A door closes softly, and the sound moves through the passage like a final syllable. Lamps are lit. The god's chamber is prepared for night. The city outside grows dim, but inside the temple, the routines continue with quiet insistence. Perhaps the gods have not left entirely. Perhaps they remain where human hands keep making room for them. Your mind descends from the raised temple platform into the streets where the sacred becomes sweat. The stone and brick above may catch the last light, but here below, life is measured by sore hands, filled baskets, aching backs, and the soft grinding sound of grain beneath a heavy stone. The air is warmer near the houses, smells of smoke, damp reed, animal dung, sour beer mash, and bread that has nearly burned at the edge. This is where the city is truly carried. You stand among workers who do not appear in myths as heroes, although without them the myths would have no roof over their heads. Farmers, brewers, potters, weavers, boatmen, herders, builders, cleaners, and scribal assistants move through the day with the ancient dignity of exhaustion. They are not background figures. They are the weight-bearing beams of the whole world. Kings speak, priests chant, gods receive, but workers lift. A man passes with a basket of clay on his head. The strap cuts into his forehead. His steps are slow, careful, and practiced. Behind him, another worker carries reeds bundled tight enough to leave scratches on the skin. A woman kneels beside a grinding stone, pushing the upper stone forward again and again. The movement is almost hypnotic. Flour gathers beneath her hands, pale and gritty, carrying tiny fragments that will wear teeth over years. Records from ancient Mesopotamia confirm that institutional workers often received rations in grain, oil, wool, or beer. Scholars at the University of Pennsylvania, Chicago, and Yale have studied administrative tablets that list labourers, supervisors, quantities, and work assignments in remarkable detail. The tablets do not usually tell you whether a worker was tired, irritated, hopeful, or secretly judging the supervisor's sandals, but they tell you that the system counted them. Counting is never neutral. To be counted is to be seen by the institution, and also used by it. A ration tablet can mean survival. It can also mean dependence. The worker receives food because labour has been recorded, categorised, and assigned. Clay becomes a memory of obligation. A name, or sometimes only a group label, sits beside quantities that decide what reaches a household. You move toward the edge of a canal, where mud sucks softly at ankles. The water is brown and slow. Men cut away silt with tools that seem too simple for the task. Boys carry smaller loads, imitating adult rhythm. A supervisor calls a number. A scribe presses marks into a tablet under a scrap of shade. The canal must remain open, because fields drink through it. If it clogs, the city's stomach tightens. There is no great mystery in that. There is only necessity. Yet necessity itself becomes sacred in Sumer. Human beings labour because the city must feed the gods, feed the palace, feed itself, and feed memory. Work is not merely economic. It is woven into the oldest stories about why humanity exists at all. In Mesopotamian myth, humans are often created to relieve divine labour, to maintain offerings, and to support the order that gods once managed more directly. That is not exactly a flattering origin story. It is more like being invented because the universe needed staff. A quirky tidbit slips into this dusty seriousness. Some ration records show beer allotments for workers, and beer was so deeply woven into daily life that it appears in hymns, offerings, and administrative lists. In one famous praise poem to the goddess of brewing, the process of making beer is described with affectionate detail. Apparently, if civilization must be built on labour, it helps to issue beverages. The weavers sit in a long room where the air is thick with fibres. Their fingers move quickly, drawing threads, tying, smoothing, adjusting. Wool catches on dry skin. Light enters through a small opening and floats with dust. Textile production was one of the great engines of ancient Mesopotamian institutions. Sheep had to be managed, wool collected, cleaned, spun, woven, measured, stored, and distributed. Nothing about cloth is simple when a whole city needs it. The scholarly debate opens quietly around these workers. Some historians argue that large institutions controlled dependent labour forces in ways that limited personal freedom. Others emphasise variation, noting that workers could belong to different statuses, households, and obligations across time. Researchers at Harvard, Oxford, and Chicago continue to examine whether terms in labour records describe slavery, corvée service, wage labour, family dependence, or categories that resist modern labels. You pause beside a doorway where a child watches adults work. The child's hair is dusty. Their eyes follow the movement of baskets and animals, already learning the choreography of survival. They may one day enter a household trade, temple service, field labour, or scribal training if fortune bends that way. Childhood in this world is not sealed away from work. It stands near it, absorbs it, and grows into it. A small courtyard opens before you. Women brew, bake, mend, and speak in low tones. A jar is sealed with clay. A reed basket is repaired. Someone laughs at a joke too quiet to hear clearly. That laugh matters. It reminds you that ancient people were not carved from solemn museum stone. They gossiped, they complained, they teased. They probably had strong opinions about neighbours, weather, and whoever borrowed a tool without returning it. Daily life continues beneath the ziggurat's shadow, but the shadow is not only physical, it is institutional, sacred, and psychological. The temple platform rises above the ordinary street, reminding everyone that the city's highest purpose is not private comfort. The gods must be served, the order must be maintained, the city must continue, even when individuals bend under its weight. Still, ordinary people are not passive clay. They negotiate, evade, pray, celebrate, borrow, marry, mourn, and remember. They make small choices inside large systems. They leave fingerprints on bricks, seal impressions on jars, names on tablets, and worn spaces in doorways. Their lives are rarely narrated directly, but they press outward from the records like heat from a wall after sunset. You hear the slap of wet clay as brickmakers work beside a pit. Clay is mixed with straw, pressed into moulds, lifted, and set down to dry. Brick by brick, the city grows and repairs itself. A temple wall may seem divine from a distance, but up close it is mud-shaped by human palms. The sacred building is literally held together by ordinary labour. That thought should probably humble every king who ever bragged about architecture, though humility had inconsistent results in royal circles. As twilight gathers, workers return through narrow streets. The day's heat loosens its grip. A donkey shakes its head near a gate. Someone carries a sleeping child. Someone else counts jars in a storeroom, because even dusk cannot free humanity from inventory. The ziggurat darkens against the sky, no longer bright but massive and watchful. You sense humanity's role with painful clarity. People stand between the gods and the ground. They produce food for offerings, bricks for temples, cloth for statues, songs for ceremonies, and records for memory. They are servants of the divine order, but also creators of the world that makes divine order visible. Without their hands, heaven has no house here. That is the quiet reversal hidden in the dust. The gods may have shaped the pattern, but humans keep repairing it. Humans carry the water, bake the bread, weave the garments, tally the grain, and rebuild what wind and war undo. If the gods have stepped back, Then every worker beneath the ziggurat becomes part of the fragile bridge left behind. Night settles on the canal. The water reflects a few early stars. A worker washes mud from his hands and watches it drift away in brown threads. He says nothing. He does not need to. The city rests on hands like his, and somewhere above him, the temple waits to be served again. Your mind moves toward water, not the gentle water of a household jar, but the older water that rises without asking permission. It spreads across the plain in the imagination first, dark beneath a heavy sky, then gleaming under lightning, then roaring through reed fences and field boundaries as if all human lines have become a private joke. The air smells of rain, river mud, frightened animals, and wet grain beginning to spoil. Floods were not abstract fears in southern Mesopotamia. They belonged to the behaviour of rivers, storms, canals, and low land. Water made civilization possible, but it also reminded every city that creation had teeth. The same channels that fed barley fields could overflow and turn the world into a brown, shifting surface. You can build walls against water, but water is patient. It attends every weakness with professional interest. The Sumerian flood traditions place this danger inside sacred memory. They tell of destruction sent from the divine realm, of a chosen survivor warned in time, and of life continuing after a terrible break. The details vary across Mesopotamian versions, but the pattern is hauntingly familiar. A world exists. The gods decide upon a flood. One human receives knowledge. A vessel preserves life. Afterward, sacrifice rises, and history resumes under altered conditions. A mainstream historical fact anchors this tale to real discovery. Archaeologists excavating ancient Mesopotamian sites found flood deposits at several locations, though not one single layer covering all cities at the same time. Scholars at the University of Pennsylvania, Oxford, and Cambridge have long noted that local floods may have inspired powerful traditions of overwhelming destruction. The evidence does not prove one neat universal catastrophe. History, as usual, refuses to stand in a straight line for our convenience. You stand now beside a low house as rain begins. At first, it is almost pleasant. Drops strike the packed roof. A child laughs. A jar is moved indoors. Then the rhythm deepens. The canal swells. The street turns slick. Animals become restless. A man steps outside, looks toward the waterline, and says nothing comforting. The river has begun speaking in a language older than tablets. The flood story is not only about drowning. It is about interruption. It divides time into a before and an after. In the Sumerian king list, kingship comes down from heaven, rules pass through ancient cities, and then the flood sweeps over the land. After the flood, kingship descends again. The structure is calm, almost bureaucratic, which somehow makes it more unsettling. Even cosmic disaster receives a place in the list. Long before ordinary historical memory, there is a remembered rupture. The old world is not simply continued, it is restarted. That idea matters deeply when asking what happens after the gods grow distant. A flood sent by divine decision suggests that the gods once intervened with terrible clarity. Yet afterward, humanity lives in a world where such clarity becomes story, ritual, warning, and debate. The waters recede, but certainty recedes with them. A quirky tidbit rises from the muddy edge of the tradition. In some Mesopotamian versions, the gods themselves become distressed during the flood, gathering like frightened creatures as the waters rage. This is not the cold perfection many later philosophies might expect from divine beings. It is messy, emotional, and strangely domestic. The gods unleash disaster, then seem unsettled by its scale. Even heaven apparently can experience project management regret. You step into the vessel of the story, not to prove it plank by plank, but to feel what it means. Inside, it is dark, crowded, and close. Wet wood creaks. Animals breathe heavily. Someone whispers a name over and over, outside. Water strikes the hull in waves that erase direction. There is no field now, no street, no temple, no palace courtyard, only floating, waiting. And the dreadful thought that the world may have ended without asking humanity's opinion. The open scholarly debate moves quietly around this vessel. Some researchers read the flood tale as myth shaped by real river disasters and environmental memory. Others interpret it as a theological exploration of divine authority, human survival, and the fragile restart of civilization. Scholars at Yale, Harvard, and Chicago continue to examine how flood stories move between Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and later literary traditions. The question is not whether one tablet answers everything. The question is why the pattern endured. When the water's lower, the silence must be enormous. Imagine stepping onto ground that is no longer familiar. Mud covers paths, houses lean or vanish, dead reeds cling to walls, storage jars have cracked, fields are buried beneath silt, the smell is thick, sour, and living. Insects gather. Birds call from places where roofs used to stand. The world has returned, but it is not the same world. Survival after the flood demands more than gratitude. It demands rebuilding. People must clear mud, recover seeds, repair canals, count the missing, tend animals, and decide where to place hope. A sacrifice may be offered not as a tidy conclusion, but as a trembling message upward. We are still here. We remember. We are afraid. Please do not do that again. The flood also changes how humanity sees itself. If the gods can decide destruction, then human life is precarious. If one person can receive warning, then listening matters. If civilization can be washed away, then cities are less permanent than they look. Mudbrick already knows this truth. The flood simply announces it with excessive enthusiasm. You walk across a plain newly exposed by retreating water. The mud grips your feet. The sky's clear now, almost offensively peaceful. A broken reed mat lies tangled around a post. A fish flickers in a shallow pool where a street may have been. The sun warms the wet earth, releasing a smell like creation beginning again, though not quite innocently. Here the hidden timeline opens wider. There is an age before the flood, when kings reign impossibly long and divine order seems near. There is the flood itself, a rupture sanctioned or allowed by the divine council. Then there is the age of rebuilding, where kingship returns, cities rise again, and human systems grow more complex. The gods do not vanish, but the human world now carries the memory that divine power can become overwhelming. That memory may help explain later laments, rituals, and political fears. A fallen city can be imagined as another kind of flood, not always of water, but of enemies, fire, hunger, or abandonment. Disaster means the protective boundary has failed. The order that held back chaos has thinned. People ask what angered the gods, what omen was missed, what duty was neglected, what hidden decision was made beyond mortal hearing. Records do not give a single emotional response. They preserve awe, fear, obedience, confusion, and stubborn continuation. That last part is important. Humanity continues. It plants again. It builds again. It writes again. It tells the flood story not only because everything was almost lost, but because something remained. Memory itself becomes a small boat carried across destruction. Night falls over the imagined floodplain. Pools reflect the stars in broken pieces. Frogs call from waterlogged fields. Far away. Someone lights a lamp in a repaired doorway, and the flame trembles as if uncertain it has permission to exist. The world after the flood is quieter but not empty. It is wounded, rinsed, and waiting for names. Perhaps the gods left no simple explanation in the mud. Perhaps they left humanity with the work of beginning again. The clay tablet before you looks modest. almost disappointingly small for something that tries to hold the beginnings of rule. Its surface is worn, broken at the edges, and crowded with lines that move like a procession through time. Names appear, vanish, return, and rearrange themselves beneath the stylus marks. Cities rise in sequence. Kings take their places. Years stretch outward into impossible distances, then narrow slowly toward numbers the body can understand. This is the strange power of lists. They seem plain. They seem obedient. They stand in rows and pretend not to dream. Yet a list can become a doorway into the oldest anxieties of civilization. It can tell you who mattered, who claimed authority, who inherited memory, and who was pushed into silence. The Sumerian king list does not merely record rulers. It builds a sacred timeline with a calmness that feels almost more mysterious than poetry. You lean close, and the first ages seem unreal. Before the flood, kings reign for spans that no human frame could survive. Thousands of years pass beneath single names. Cities hold kingship for periods so vast that ordinary history becomes soft and distant. Then the flood arrives, and everything is broken. Afterward, kingship descends again, but the reigns grow shorter, slowly becoming more familiar, though still grand enough to make an accountant blink with concern. Records confirm that several versions of the Sumerian king list have been found, copied across time by scribes who preserved and reshaped this sequence of rulers. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied the list as a source for early Mesopotamian political memory, mythology, chronology, and ideology. It includes rulers who are likely historical, rulers who are uncertain, and rulers who belong more deeply to sacred tradition. The list is not a simple register. It is a claim about order. Kingship comes from heaven. It resides in one city, then moves to another. Authority is not scattered randomly across the plain. It flows through chosen places, even if those choices are difficult to explain. The list makes history look like a procession guided by invisible hands. It turns rivalry between cities into a pattern that can be recited, copied, and believed. You imagine a student scribe copying these names by lamplight. His back aches. His reed stylus grows dull. He must keep the sequence straight, because lists are unforgiving things. One missed line, and sacred time stumbles. Perhaps his teacher watches with a terrifying patience known only to teachers and temple officials. The boy presses the signs carefully, not knowing that thousands of years later, strangers will stare at his work and ask impossible questions. A quirky tidbit clings to these early rulers. One famous king, Enmenlu-Ana, is credited in some versions with a reign of 43,200 years. That is a remarkable stretch of public service. One hopes he took breaks. Another ruler, Alulim of Eridu, is given a reign of 28,800 years, which is less a lifespan than a geological mood. These numbers are not casual exaggerations. They belong to a symbolic world where ancient authority expands beyond ordinary measure. The scholarly debate becomes especially delicate here. Some researchers see the impossible reigns as mythic numbers expressing a sacred age before normal time. Others argue they may reflect mathematical patterning, dynastic memory, theological prestige, or scribal attempts to harmonize competing city traditions. Discussions at Chicago, Harvard, and Oxford continue to treat the list as neither pure fiction nor straightforward history, but as a carefully shaped document sitting between memory and power. You can feel why the numbers matter. A normal reign belongs to human politics. An impossible reign belongs to cosmic order. By placing vast lifespans before the flood, the list suggests that the earliest world operated differently. Time itself may have felt heavier, wider, less broken into the small measures of human breath. Those kings are not merely old. They belong to a world where heaven's nearness makes time strange. Then comes the narrowing. After the flood, reign lengths remain long for a while, but they begin to fall toward the scale of mortal life. The movement feels almost like a descent from myth into history. Vast twilight gives way to torchlight. Sacred memory becomes dynastic record. Giants of time become kings of cities, then rulers who leave inscriptions, enemies, temples, and disputes behind them. You stand inside that narrowing, and it feels like being born into a later, smaller world. The gods still exist, but their age of direct arrangement seems to have passed into story. Kingship remains divine in origin, yet it must now operate through human succession, warfare, diplomacy, marriage, labour, and administration. The old system has not disappeared. It has been translated into institutions. That translation is never peaceful. Every city on the list gains dignity by appearing in the sequence. Every city left out must live with silence. The list claims that kingship moves, but it also decides who gets remembered as a lawful holder of it. Memory is not gentle. It can crown one place and erase another with the same dry line of clay. You hear the scratch of a stylus again, though the room is only imagined. The scribe does not explain why one city follows another. He writes as if the movement is known. Eridu holds kingship, then another city, then another. The pattern itself carries authority. The reader is meant to see succession, not chaos. The list turns messy human conflict into a sacred chain, yet the chain has cracks. Different versions of the list vary. Some rulers appear in one tradition and not another. Some dynasties overlap historically, even if the list places them one after another. Modern scholars have shown that the text simplifies complex political realities, presenting sequential rule where competing city-states may have existed at the same time. The list is less a photograph than a ceremonial arrangement of memory. That makes it more revealing, not less. People do not carefully shape stories that do not matter. The effort to organize kingship into a single line suggests a deep hunger for unity. Sumerian city-states were often independent, rivalrous, and proud. Each had its patron gods, institutions, and traditions. A list that binds them into one descending gift from heaven offers a vision of order larger than any single wall. Perhaps that is why the list feels like a relic of abandonment as much as authority. It tries to preserve the path by which divine kingship moved through human hands. It says there was a system. It says the system began beyond the earth. It says disaster interrupted it. It says the gift returned, but never quite in the same form. Beneath the names, you sense the ache of trying to remember how the world was arranged when the gods were closer. The tablet's broken edge becomes important. Part of the text is lost. Names vanish into damage. The clay itself refuses completeness. You're left with fragments of an ancient attempt to make history whole, and the missing pieces seem almost appropriate. A perfect list would feel too confident. A broken one feels truer to human memory. Your eyes move over the lines once more. Impossible reigns, sacred cities, flood rupture, restored kingship, shortening time. The system reveals itself not as a secret code, but as a slow descent from divine abundance into human responsibility. The old rulers last too long. The later rulers must die. The earlier cities shine like myth. The later cities fight, rebuild, boast, and fall. In the dimness, the list no longer feels like mere chronology. It feels like a mourning object. It remembers a time when authority seemed to come directly from heaven, then watches that authority pass into the uncertain custody of men. And perhaps every name pressed into clay is also a question. Who rules when the gods no longer remain near enough to be seen? Your attention turns toward the first cities as if they are lamps set across a dark plain. Their names come softly, each one carrying a different weight. Eridu, Uruk, Kish, Nippur, Lagash, They do not rise together in one neat line, because living cities are rude to neatness. They grow, compete, remember, exaggerate, borrow stories, and sometimes glare at one another across canals with deeply ancient civic pride. You approach Eridu first. where the land lies low and the memory feels older than stone. The air smells of marsh water, fish, reeds, and sun-warmed mud. Birds lift from the wetlands in sudden pale flashes. The settlement seems half built from earth and half summoned from water. Later tradition remembered Eridu as a fir city, a place associated with the wise god Enki, fresh water, deep knowledge, craft, and the hidden order beneath visible things. Archaeology confirms that Eridu was one of the earliest important settlement centres in southern Mesopotamia, with a long sequence of temple buildings constructed and rebuilt over centuries. Scholars connected with major research institutions, including the University of Chicago, Oxford and Cambridge, have studied its temple levels as evidence for developing sacred architecture before the great flowering of later cities. The site gives the impression of devotion growing upward through repeated rebuilding. You stand near those imagined temple remains, watching mud brick rise on older mud brick. Each generation restores the sacred place, but restoration also buries what came before. The oldest walls disappear beneath newer platforms. The first room becomes a memory inside the next room. Eridu teaches that holiness can be layered. It does not need to remain visible to remain powerful. A quirky fringe tidbit attaches itself to Eridu like mist over water. Later Mesopotamian lore sometimes links primeval wisdom with strange sages from the deep, figures who bring arts of civilization to humanity. Modern fantasies have made them louder than the texts require, usually with suspiciously shiny helmets in the imagination. Yet the motif itself is meaningful. Knowledge is pictured as rising from below, from hidden waters, not merely descending from the sky. From Eridu, your path moves toward Uruk, broader, louder, and more restless. The smell changes, less marsh stillness, more baked brick, sweat, grain, and traffic. Uruk feels like a city that knows it is important and would mention this before you asked. Its precincts, walls, workshops, and administrative systems make it one of the defining urban centres of early Mesopotamia. Here, scale becomes a kind of argument. Records and excavations confirm that Uruk grew into a vast early city during the 4th millennium before the Common Era, associated with monumental buildings, mass-produced pottery, cylinder seals, administrative tablets, and expanding economic networks. Research from institutions such as Yale, the University of Pennsylvania, and the German Archaeological Institute has shaped modern understanding of Uruk's urban transformation. This was not a village that got slightly ambitious. It was a new kind of human concentration. You hear Uruk before you fully see it. Hooves strike packed earth. A cart groans under jars. Craftsmen call across courtyards. A seal cutter works with tiny controlled movements, carving images so small they seem like dreams trapped in stone. A scribe presses signs into damp clay, transforming goods and labour into memory. The city does not simply live, it organises itself continuously, almost anxiously. Uruk also holds the shadow of kingship and legend. The name of Gilgamesh would later be tied to it, remembered as a ruler, hero, and restless seeker who could not escape mortality. Whether the legendary Gilgamesh reflects a historical ruler remains debated, but the association reveals what Uruk became in memory. It was not just a city of walls, it was a city where human ambition rose high enough to trouble the gods. The scholarly debate around Uruk remains active and careful. Some researchers emphasize temple-centered growth and administrative innovation. Others stress trade, craft specialization, migration, inequality, and environmental opportunity. Scholars at Harvard, Chicago, and Oxford continue to examine whether Uruk's rise was driven mostly by religious institutions, political power, economic networks, or a combination that refuses to be separated cleanly. Your path turns toward a Kish, a city whose name carries the ring of authority. In later tradition, kingship after the flood comes first to Kish. That does not make every claim simple history. but it does make Kish a powerful symbol of restored order. The landscape around it feels drier, more open. Dust moves along the ground in thin, restless lines. A gate stands in the mind, half real and half remembered. Kish seems to represent a different kind of legitimacy. If Eridu feels primordial and Uruk feels expansive, Kish feels like a seal pressed onto rule itself. To hold kingship from Kish was to stand in a prestigious line. Later rulers sometimes used the title King of Kish as a claim to broad authority, even when politics had grown far beyond the city's earliest fame. Titles, once powerful, have very long afterlives. You see a ruler's messenger arriving at dusk. His cloak is travel-stained. He carries words that may affect fields, alliances, or war. The city receives him through formal pathways, because communication between cities is never simply communication. It is diplomacy, threat, negotiation, and theatre. A clay tablet may weigh little, but it can carry a storm inside it. Then Nippur draws you inward, and the mood changes again. Nippur was not always a dominant political capital, but it was a sacred centre of immense prestige, associated especially with Enlil, one of the great gods of the Mesopotamian pantheon. To control or honour Nippur was to touch a deeper legitimacy. Some cities command armies, others command memory. Nippur did something quieter and more durable. Excavations at Nippur, especially by teams connected with the University of Pennsylvania, revealed major temple remains, archives, and thousands of tablets. Scholars have long recognised Nippur as a key centre for scribal learning and religious tradition. In its schools and archives, the past was copied, taught, preserved, and reshaped. The city did not merely hold ruins, it held the grammar of remembrance. The air in Nippur feels cooler in your imagination, perhaps because scribal rooms have gathered around you. Students copy lexical lists, hymns, myths, and model contracts. Their tablets dry in rows. Their mistakes are corrected. Their hands learn discipline through repetition. A civilization survives not only by winning battles, but by training children to copy old words until they become almost sacred. A small detail brings the scene close. Student tablets from Mesopotamian scribal schools sometimes preserve awkward handwriting, corrections, and repeated exercises. The ancient classroom was not always dignified. Somewhere, a tired student probably stared at a sign and wished the invention of writing had been delayed by a few centuries. This is comforting. Human reluctance is also ancient. The forgotten first cities reveal a system of sacred authority distributed across place. Eridu remembers origin and wisdom. Uruk remembers urban scale and heroic ambition. Kish remembers restored kingship. Nippur remembers divine legitimacy and scholarly preservation. These cities are not interchangeable dots on a map. They are stations in a landscape of meaning, yet competition hums beneath the reverence. Each city has its patron deity, its ruling families, its fields, its canals, its pride, its archives, and its version of what matters most. The gods may belong to a shared pantheon, but cities experience them locally. A deity has a house, festivals, servants, and political weight. Sacred geography becomes civic identity. As night gathers, the cities seem to glow in different colours across the plain. Eridu glows with deep water, Uruk with kiln fire, Kish with bronze and dust, Nippur with lamp smoke over tablets. Each one claims a fragment of the order left behind. None holds the whole pattern entirely. Perhaps that is why their memories compete and complete one another. When divine nearness fades, cities become containers of sacred traces. One preserves the first house, one preserves the Great Wall, one preserves the title, one preserves the tablet. Together, they form an incomplete map of what humanity believed it had inherited. You stand between them in the darkening land, hearing distant water in the canals and wind against mud brick walls. The gods may have stepped back from direct sight, but their absence has left addresses, and each city whispers quietly, that heaven once came here. Your gaze lifts from the mud-brick roofs toward a sky that seems calm only from a distance. At night, the heavens open above Mesopotamia with unsettling clarity. The air cools, the river darkens, and the flat land becomes a listening floor beneath the stars. No mountain interrupts the horizon, no forest hides the edge of the world. The sky rests directly upon the plain, immense, glittering, and impossible to ignore. You stand beside a temple scholar wrapped in a woolen garment against the cold. A small lamp burns near his feet, shielded from the breeze. Beside him lies a tablet, still damp enough to receive signs. His eyes move slowly across the sky, not with casual admiration, but with trained suspicion. A bright planet has appeared near the moon. A reddish star hangs low. Clouds gather where no clouds were expected. To him, these are not ornaments, they are messages. When divine voices become indirect, the world itself becomes a tablet. Stars, storms, eclipses, births, dreams, smoke, animal entrails, and the behaviour of oil on water may all carry meaning. The gods do not need to stand in the street if they can write across the sky. Of course, this creates a small difficulty. The sky has terrible handwriting. That is why specialists are required. Records confirm that Mesopotamian scholars developed extensive omen traditions, including celestial omens that linked heavenly phenomena with events on Earth. Research at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago has shown that these traditions formed a disciplined scholarly culture, especially in later periods that inherited the older southern Mesopotamian foundations. The heavens were watched, recorded, compared, and interpreted within systems of learned expectation. You hear the scholar's stylus press into clay. He notes the moon's shape, the position of a planet, the timing of a phenomenon, perhaps the direction of wind. His work is careful, not frantic. Calmness matters when fear has official duties. He belongs to a chain of observers who believe that past signs can help interpret present danger. If a pattern occurred before, perhaps it may occur again. This is not science in the modern sense. Though it contains observation, it is not mere fantasy either. Though it contains symbols, it is a form of sacred reasoning. The gods govern both heaven and earth, so the two realms may mirror one another. A disturbance above may signal a disturbance below. An eclipse may warn of royal danger. A strange birth may foreshadow political unrest. The universe is not silent, but coded. A quirky detail waits among the scholarly tablets. Some omen collections list astonishingly specific interpretations, where tiny variations in appearance, direction, colour, or timing produce different predictions. One imagines an exhausted apprentice learning that a spot on one side means one thing, while a spot on another side means something inconveniently different. Ancient scholarship was not easier just because it involved more sheep. The open debate remains thoughtful. Some historians interpret omen study as religious divination, rooted in belief that the gods communicated through signs. Others emphasize its political usefulness, since omens gave kings structured ways to manage risk and uncertainty. Scholars at Harvard, Stanford, and Chicago continue to ask how far these systems encouraged genuine empirical observation, and how far they reinforced royal authority through controlled interpretation. You move from the rooftop to a chamber where tablets are stored in baskets and on shelves. The room smells of clay, reed, smoke, and old dust. Each tablet holds a small portion of the world's anxiety. If this happens, then that may follow. If the moon darkens here, the king should beware. If a storm comes from that direction, the land may suffer. The logic is patient, repetitive, almost hypnotic. There is a strange comfort in such lists. They imply that danger is not random. Disaster may be terrible, but perhaps it can be read in advance. Perhaps the gods are severe, but not entirely mute. Perhaps a ruler can take precautions. Perhaps rituals can divert harm. Perhaps knowledge can soften fate, if not cancel it. You stand beside a diviner examining the liver of a sacrificed animal. The organ gleams under lamplight, wet and dark, its surface divided by trained imagination into meaningful zones. The diviner looks for marks, shapes, swelling, absence, and irregularity. To modern eyes, it may seem uneasy and intimate. To him, it is a map of divine decision. The animal's body has become a place where heaven briefly leaves fingerprints. The room grows very quiet. A royal messenger waits near the door. His sandals are dusty. His face reveals nothing. Because people near power learn to hide their thoughts. The diviner must speak carefully. A bad omen can unsettle a court. A good omen can support action. A doubtful omen may require additional rituals, substitutions, delays, or further inquiry. The gods may not answer plainly, but kings still demand usable sentences. This is the burden of specialists in a world after direct nearness. They are asked to translate uncertainty into policy. Should the king go to war? Should a canal project begin? Should a festival proceed? Is illness a private misfortune or a warning from above? Is an eclipse only shadow? Or is it a threat against the throne? The scholar stands between ignorance and decision, which is rarely a restful position. Yet these systems also reveal humility. The king may command armies, but he still waits for signs. The priest may know rituals, but he still watches the sky. The scribe may preserve traditions, but he still copies older authorities. No one fully owns the future. Everyone listens outward, upward, inward, seeking the faint pattern beneath events. Your mind returns to the night roof. The stars sharpen as the air cools. A dog barks somewhere below. Water moves in a canal with a soft, repetitive sound. From a nearby house comes the scent of onions, herbs, and warm bread. Ordinary life carrying on beneath cosmic inspection. A child points at the moon, perhaps seeing beauty where scholars see warnings. Both may be right. Celestial observation slowly builds archives of time. Days, months, appearances, disappearances, and cycles become part of learned memory. In later Mesopotamian tradition, these habits would contribute to remarkably sophisticated astronomy. The roots lie partly in omen study, where watching the heavens mattered because the heavens mattered politically and religiously. Fear, strangely enough, can become a school. The system has expanded. Cities hold temples hold statues, palaces hold rulers, archives hold memory, rooftops hold watchers. The gods, no longer heard in simple speech, are approached through layers of interpretation. Every layer adds knowledge, and every layer also adds distance. By the time a message reaches the king, it has passed through sky, sign, scholar, tablet, tradition, and fear. You feel the loneliness inside that arrangement. A god who speaks through thunder is still close enough to terrify. A god who speaks through a rare arrangement of stars requires patient experts, stored precedents, and anxious debate. The sacred has not disappeared, but it has become intellectual, procedural, and veiled. Humanity has become a species of interpreters. Near midnight, the scholar lifts his eyes again. The heavens do not explain themselves. They burn in silence, bright and remote. His hand hovers over the clay, ready to fix the moment before it passes. That gesture is deeply human. To see a sign, to fear losing it, to mark it down, to hope someone later will understand. Perhaps the gods left no empty sky. Perhaps they left a sky too full of meanings for any one lifetime to read. A low voice rises from a ruined street, and the sound seems older than grief itself. You are standing where a temple courtyard has been emptied by fire, invasion, hunger, or the slow violence of abandonment. The walls remain, but they no longer feel like walls. They are edges around absence. Ash lies in cracks. A broken jar rests on its side. Wind moves through a doorway once guarded by ritual, and the dust answers with a whisper. The city lament begins not with shouting, but with recognition. Something has gone wrong beyond repair. Not merely a house or a wall or a field, but the sacred relationship that made the city meaningful. The god has left the sanctuary. The goddess has turned away. The protective presence has departed, and the city is now exposed to a world that feels suddenly too large. You hear the lament as if sung by temple musicians in a room filled with smoke. The rhythm is slow enough for sorrow to breathe. It does not simply list damage. It gives the ruined city a voice. Streets mourn, gates mourn, temples mourn. The people cry out, but the buildings themselves seem wounded. In these songs, architecture becomes flesh, and collapse becomes a kind of death. Records confirm that Mesopotamian city laments preserved poetic memories of destruction, especially the fall of cities and sanctuaries. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have studied texts such as Laments for Ur and other cities as ritual poetry, political memory, and theology shaped by catastrophe. These compositions do not read like ordinary reports. They transform disaster into sacred speech. You move along a street where roof beams have fallen inward. The smell is sharp, a mixture of old smoke, damp clay, and spoiled grain. A loom weight lies near a doorway, useless now. Someone once sat there, drawing threads across a frame, perhaps listening to gossip from the next house. The lament gathers such losses without naming every person. It lets the city stand for them all. There is a terrible order in these poems. Disaster is not meaningless. The gods have decreed, allowed, or failed to prevent it. Divine assemblies may be invoked. Great powers may decide a city's fate. A goddess may weep over her people, yet still be unable to stop the destruction. That tension gives the laments their unsettling force. The gods are mighty, but the city still burns. The goddess loves, yet she leaves. A quirky tidbit waits inside this sorrow. Some laments describe deities departing their temples almost like royal households evacuating a palace, with divine possessions, attendants, and dignity disrupted. It is strangely domestic. You can imagine heaven packing badly under pressure, which is not a reverent image. But grief often makes even the sacred feel painfully household-sized. The open scholarly debate settles around the purpose of these laments. Some researchers interpret them as rituals used to mourn and eventually restore damaged temples. Others see them as literary responses to political collapse, especially after the fall of powerful cities. Scholars at Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford continue to ask whether these poems were sung in actual ceremonies, copied in scribal schools, used for royal ideology, or preserved because they gave language to collective trauma. You pause beside the threshold of a sanctuary. The inner chamber is empty. That emptiness is not simple. It does not mean the god never existed to the worshippers. It means the relationship is broken. The bed is unoccupied. The offerings no longer rise in proper order. The clean vessels are cracked. The god's house has become a shell. This is one of the most haunting ideas in Sumerian religious memory. A city can lose its deity, not because the deity dies, but because the bond is withdrawn. The god goes away, and the city becomes spiritually homeless. Its streets still exist. Its people may still breathe. Its walls may still stand in broken lines. But the centre has been removed. You feel that removal in the silence. No procession crosses the courtyard. No singer tunes the old melody. No priest lifts bread toward the divine image. No scribe notes the daily offering. The entire system of service has collapsed into still objects. Bowls without food, basins without water, storerooms without order. A temple without rhythm is almost more unsettling than a battlefield. The lament gives that silence a shape. It says the storm came. It says the enemy entered. It says the mother goddess cried. It says the young and old suffered. It says canals failed, fields emptied, and streets became strange. Yet beneath every image lies the same wound. The city was not protected. The sacred roof did not hold. A mainstream historical fact deepens the scene. The city of Ur suffered a major political collapse around the end of the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, when the 3rd dynasty of Ur fell amid invasion, internal strain, and regional upheaval. Modern historians at major universities continue to examine the causes, including military pressure, administrative stress, climate questions, and shifting alliances. The lament for Ur turns the political fall into cosmic mourning. You walk through Ur in the imagination, not at its height, but in the shadow of loss. The moon god city once glowed with prestige, administration, trade, and ritual power. Now the lament pictures devastation spreading through its sacred and domestic spaces. The city is not merely defeated, it is unmade in the language of grief. The phrase of debate must remain careful. Some scholars argue that these laments were not simple eyewitness accounts, but stylized theological poems shaped for later ritual use. Others believe they preserve memories of real suffering filtered through sacred tradition. The disagreement matters because it changes how you hear the text. Is it history singing like ritual, or ritual remembering history? Perhaps the answer is both, because human grief rarely files its paperwork neatly. The hidden timeline darkens here. In the earliest memory, gods establish order. In the age of cities, humans maintain that order through temples, kings, labour, and writing. But in the laments, order fails. The gods leave. The city breaks. Humans are left among ruins, still speaking to powers that have stepped beyond reach. There is no clean rebellion in this grief. The lament does not simply accuse the gods and walk away. It pleads, mourns, explains, and waits. It hopes for return. It asks that the city be restored, that the divine heart soften, that the temple rise again from dust. Even abandonment does not end relationship. It changes its sound. Your hand touches a fallen brick. It crumbles slightly beneath your fingers. Mud brick is honest about impermanence. It does not pretend to last forever. Yet humans built sacred houses from it anyway. They raised platforms, painted walls, carried offerings, and believed that the gods might dwell there. The fragility of the material makes the devotion more moving, not less. Evening gathers over the broken city. The sky turns copper, then purple, then deep blue. A bird settles on a ruined wall. Somewhere in the distance, a surviving family lights a small fire, and its smoke rises without ceremony. No priest announces it, no tablet records it. Yet the flame continues the oldest argument against destruction. The lament does not give final comfort. It does something quieter. It keeps the abandoned city from disappearing entirely. It holds grief in measured lines, so memory does not scatter like ash. It lets the listener stand among ruins and hear the echo of what once filled them. Perhaps this is what remains when gods withdraw from their houses. Not certainty, not silence. A song that refuses to leave. The air changes as Inanna enters the story. It grows warmer, sharper, perfumed with cedar, wool, metal, and the faint sweetness of dates left in a bowl too long. You're no longer only among ruined gates and silent temples. You stand near a presence that is restless by nature. Inanna is not a quiet goddess arranged neatly for human comfort. She is desire, battle, splendour, danger, kingship, and the fierce brightness of a morning star that does not ask permission to rise. Her stories do not soothe easily. They glitter, they trouble, they move between love songs, royal power, divine ambition, and the shadowed road that leads downward. If some gods seem to withdraw into distance, Inanna does something more disturbing. She leaves by choice, descends into a realm where ordinary strength fails, and returns changed. Her movement becomes a pattern of absence and return, but never a simple rescue. You follow her toward a gate that does not open onto any earthly street. The threshold is cold. The air smells of dust sealed away from sunlight. At each gate, something is removed. Crown, jewelry, garment, emblem, layer by layer. The goddess is stripped of power until her glory no longer protects her. This is no ordinary journey. It is a divine unmaking, told with a calm precision that makes it more unsettling. Records confirm that the Sumerian poem often called The Descent of Inanna is among the most remarkable surviving works of ancient Mesopotamian literature. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied its themes of power, death, ritual substitution, and divine vulnerability. The text is preserved through tablets copied by scribes, whose quiet schoolrooms carried one of the strangest journeys in ancient religion. You stand beside the first gate, listening as the keeper demands her ornaments. Each object removed is more than decoration. It is authority made visible. Inanna's crown marks rule. Her beads and garments mark identity. Her measuring rod and line belong to order, power, and role. As each item is taken, the goddess becomes less like a queen in procession and more like a being exposed to the law of another realm. This descent matters because it reveals a divine world with boundaries. Inanna is powerful but not free from every consequence. The underworld has its own queen, Ereshkigal, whose authority is not ornamental. She rules the place where human ambition, beauty, kingship, and even divine radiance lose their usual language. Inanna does not conquer by simply arriving. She is judged, killed, and hung like a lifeless thing. The room grows still. A quirky tidbit clings to this dark tale. Inanna had instructed her attendant Nippur to seek help if she did not return. That detail is strangely practical. Even a goddess heading into the underworld prepares a contingency plan, which is wise management and, frankly, more organized than many later heroes with swords and impressive hair. Divine danger still requires reliable staff. The open scholarly debate around Inanna's descent remains layered. Some researchers interpret the poem as a myth about seasonal cycles, death, fertility, and renewal. Others argue that it concerns political power, ritual substitution, gendered authority, or the dangerous crossing of cosmic boundaries. Scholars at Harvard, Chicago, and Oxford continue to explore whether the story reflects cult practice, royal ideology, theology, or poetic speculation about the limits of power. You feel the force of that question in the underworld's darkness. Why would a goddess descend? Curiosity, ambition, mourning, confrontation, destiny, ritual necessity, or something older than motive? The poem does not flatten her into one explanation. It lets her remain difficult. Inanna is not a lesson with sandals. She is a divine force whose choices disturb the order around her. When she is gone, the world above must react. Her absence is not private. A goddess of love and war cannot disappear without consequence. The divine system notices. Her servant pleads. Great gods are approached. Help must be crafted carefully, not with blunt force. The return of Inanna requires cunning, sympathy, and the strange creation of beings able to enter grief without being seized by it. You move into the chamber of Ereshkigal. She's not merely villainous. No matter how tempting simple stories can be, she is suffering, ruling, labouring in darkness, perhaps giving birth, perhaps writhing in pain. The helpers sent to her do not attack. They mirror her cries. They honour her anguish. By acknowledging the Queen of the Dead, they gain what violence could not. In this tale, empathy becomes a key to a locked cosmic door. That is unexpected. It is also deeply ancient. A world built on hierarchy still imagines that recognition matters. The underworld queen must be seen in her pain. The dead realm must be addressed according to its own rules. Inanna's return is not a cheerful escape. It is a negotiated disturbance in the balance between above and below, yet no one returns without cost. A substitute must be found. Life taken back from death creates a debt. Inanna comes upward, but the underworld sends its claim along with her. The gaze turns toward Dumuzi, her consort, who is found not in mourning, but seated in splendour. His failure to grieve becomes dangerous. Power has emotional expectations. Ancient households probably knew this already, but myth gives it excellent lighting. You see Dumuzi's fine garments, his throne, his ease. The contrast is sharp. Inanna has been stripped, killed, and restored through peril. He appears comfortable. The demons of the underworld stand near, patient and unblinking. The story becomes no longer only about divine descent, but about relationship, loyalty, public sorrow, and the terrible price of restored life. A mainstream historical fact gives the myth a wider setting. Inanna, later closely associated with Ishtar in Akkadian tradition, remained one of the most important goddesses of Mesopotamia for centuries. Her worship crossed cities, languages, and dynasties, appearing in hymns, royal ideology, love poetry, and martial imagery. Scholars at Yale, Stanford, and Chicago have examined how her figure joined erotic power, warfare, sovereignty, and celestial symbolism in ways modern categories separate too quickly. That mixture helps explain her dangerous return. Inanna is not a gentle symbol of renewal alone. She is the force that demands movement where stillness has settled. She breaks boundaries, takes powers, inspires kings, arouses lovers, terrifies enemies, and enters death's territory. If divine withdrawal creates silence, Inanna's stories insist that divine return can be just as unsettling. You stand in a world where the goddess has come back, but not to restore everything neatly. Dumuzi's fate introduces cycles of absence into human and divine life. Some traditions connect his departure and partial return with mourning rites and seasonal patterns. Whether these rituals map directly onto agriculture remains debated, but the emotional structure is clear. Presence alternates with loss. Love is bound to lament. Return is never free. The system reveals another layer. The gods do not simply stand above humans as fixed points. They themselves move through absence, vulnerability, conflict, and debt. Their stories provide patterns that humans can recognize in their own lives. A city loses its god. A lover loses the beloved. A ruler loses favor. A field loses fertility. A household loses a child. Myth gives shape to the recurring wound. Inanna's descent also changes how you hear the silence of temples. Absence may not always mean abandonment. Sometimes absence is movement beyond human sight. Sometimes a divine figure has entered a hidden realm, been stripped of signs, and crossed into a darkness where no ordinary prayer can follow. The unseen world is not empty. It may be crowded with negotiations that humans only feel as delay. The scent of cedar fades, replaced by cold earth and lamp smoke. You stand again near a threshold, neither fully above nor below. Inanna's return passes by like a gust of heated wind from a sealed chamber. She is alive, radiant, severe, and not entirely comforting. She has learned something no crown could teach. Perhaps humanity remembered her because she made divine absence dramatic rather than blank. Perhaps the gods who leave are not always departing from us. Perhaps some are travelling through darkness, carrying a debt they cannot put down. The sound of water returns, but it is not floodwater now. It is quieter, deeper, hidden beneath the visible earth. You hear it in the imagination as a low movement under clay floors, temple foundations, reed beds, and city walls. It is the sweet water below, the concealed source, the dark reservoir from which wisdom rises in old stories like a thought before speech. Enki belongs to that depth. You approach his world through the marshlands near Eridu, where reeds crowd the channels and birds step carefully through shining shallows. The air smells of mud, fish, damp roots, and warm vegetation. Light breaks on the water in broken silver pieces. Nothing here feels entirely firm. Land becomes water, water becomes path, and every reflection suggests that the world has another version underneath it. Enki is difficult to hold in one simple shape. He is creator, craftsman, magician, trickster, counselor, and keeper of hidden plans. He is associated with wisdom and fresh water, with technical skill and clever speech, with the ordering powers that make civilization function. He does not always act directly. Often, he arranges, advises, releases, protects, or bends a rigid decree just enough for life to continue. Records confirm that Enki, known later in Akkadian contexts as E, was one of the major deities of Mesopotamian religion, especially linked with Eridu and the subterranean fresh waters. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have examined his role in myths of creation, kingship, craft knowledge, magic, and divine mediation. His presence runs beneath many traditions. Like water below the soil, you step into an imagined shrine where the floor is cool beneath your feet. A basin catches light. Offerings stand arranged with quiet precision. No one here speaks loudly. Enki's wisdom does not feel like thunder. It feels like a door opening in the mind, or a secret instruction passed at night to someone who will need it later. This is knowledge as survival, not decoration. A quirky tidbit rises from the deep. Enki appears in stories where he outwits other divine powers, protects humanity from destruction, or uses cleverness to soften severe decisions. He is not chaos, exactly, but he is also not stiff obedience. If the divine assembly is a formal council, Enki is the one quietly noticing the loophole. Every ancient bureaucracy needs one merciful genius with damp shoes. His hidden design appears most clearly in myths where humanity nearly disappears. In flood traditions, a wise god connected with the deep warns the human survivor, allowing life to pass through catastrophe. In creation stories, Enki helps shape the conditions in which humans can exist and work. He does not always prevent hardship, but he often prevents finality. That distinction matters in a world where gods can withdraw, decree, or remain silent. You can feel the pattern forming. Enki does not remove the burden of humanity. He makes burden survivable. He gives crafts, knowledge, ritual techniques, purification, plans, and sometimes warnings. His gifts are not usually simple freedom. They are systems, canal making, brick shaping, writing, music, kingship, temple service, judgment, order, skills that allow humans to inhabit a world no longer managed by visible gods. The scholarly debate around Enki remains rich and unsettled. Some researchers interpret him as a culture hero within divine form, representing technical intelligence and social order. Others emphasize his theological role as mediator between cosmic decree and human survival. Scholars at Harvard, Stanford, and Chicago continue to ask how myths of Enki reflect the growth of urban institutions, ritual expertise, and the ancient belief that wisdom comes from hidden sources. You move deeper into the marsh. Reeds brush your arms with dry whispers. A frog slips into water. Somewhere, a boat moves without urgency, its pole pressing into the mud. The marsh is not empty wilderness. It is a living borderland, feeding people with fish, birds, reeds, and roots. It is also a perfect setting for a god of thresholds. Enki's wisdom belongs where categories blur. One story tells of divine powers called the gifts or ordinances of civilization, which pass from Enki's keeping to Inanna through a strange and vivid encounter. These powers include offices, arts, crafts, social roles, and sacred functions. The tale is playful, political, and symbolic all at once. civilization is imagined not as one invention, but as a collection of charged powers that can be guarded, transferred, celebrated, and perhaps stolen with style. The image is extraordinary. Human life depends on invisible structures, not merely tools, but roles, not merely buildings, but meanings, kingship, priesthood, lamentation, music, craft, judgment, desire, victory, scribal skill, and ritual order become almost portable divine forces. They are the hidden software of the ancient city, though the Sumerians, mercifully, did not have to endure software updates. This reveals Enki's deeper importance. The gods may no longer stand openly among humans, but the systems they established remain active. A city is not only bricks and bodies, it is a pattern of functions, each one carrying sacred weight. The brewer brews within a gift, the singer sings within a gift, the judge judges within a gift, the scribe writes within a gift. Life becomes a performance of powers inherited from beyond humanity. You pause beside a reed hut where smoke escapes through a small opening. Inside, someone repairs a net. Outside, a child watches ripples move through a channel. The scene is plain, but Enki's influence makes it mysterious. Craft is wisdom made physical. A net, a boat, a canal, a measuring line, a tablet, a song. Each one turns hidden order into useful form. That is perhaps why Enki feels less like a distant monarch and more like an intelligence working through processes. He is present when water is directed, when a ritual is correctly spoken, when a craftsman solves a problem, when a survivor hears a warning, when a rigid fate is softened by cunning. He's not always near in body, he's near in method. The human role sharpens under his sign. People are not merely servants waiting for divine command. They are operators of inherited designs. They carry skills whose origins are imagined as sacred. They maintain canals because water must move. They keep rituals because danger must be managed. They write because memory must be fixed. They build because order needs shape. Their labour is heavy, but it is also participation in a plan older than themselves. Yet Enki's wisdom has shadows. Trickster intelligence can save, but it can also unsettle. Hidden plans are comforting only when they help you. When they remain hidden, they feel like manipulation. A god of secrets can protect humanity from disaster, but he also reminds humanity that decisions are being made where human eyes cannot follow. Mercy itself may arrive through indirect paths. The water beneath the earth keeps moving. You look toward Eridu as evening lowers over the marsh. The first stars appear in pools before they appear in the sky. The temple mound stands dark against the horizon, layered with generations of rebuilding. Beneath it, in memory, lies the deep source, the place where wisdom waits before becoming speech. The god of hidden water does not shout from heaven. He murmurs through foundations. Perhaps this is what remained after divine nearness changed. Not open conversation, not constant appearance, not a god seated plainly at the city gate. Instead, there are systems, crafts, signs, stories, and sudden rescues. There is knowledge arriving from below, from dreams, from old tablets, from practiced hands, from the patient flow of water under the visible world. Perhaps Enki's design was never meant to be fully seen. Perhaps humanity lives inside it still, touching only the surface. Your thoughts return to the question that sits beneath every temple floor and every field boundary. Why were humans placed in the world at all? Not in the polished way later philosophers might ask it, seated comfortably with time to spare. Here, the question smells of barley dust, wet clay, smoke, sweat, and old bread. It is asked by hands that grind grain, carry bricks, clear canals, and lift offerings toward gods whose faces remain hidden behind ritual. In Mesopotamian myth, the answer is rarely flattering. Humans are not always imagined as beloved children of the cosmos, placed gently in gardens for leisure and moral improvement. They are made because work must be done. The gods grow weary. The burdens of maintenance press upon the divine order. The digging, carrying, feeding, serving, and ritual labour must be passed downward. That idea is both practical and unsettling. It explains why human life feels heavy. It explains why temples require offerings, why fields require endless labour, why kings must organise work, and why scribes must count what everyone would rather forget. Humanity exists not outside the divine economy, but inside it. People are made to carry responsibilities that once belonged elsewhere. Records from Mesopotamian literature confirm that creation traditions often connect human beings with labour for the gods. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, Chicago, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied texts where human creation answers a problem within the divine world. The details vary across stories, languages, and periods, yet the pattern remains powerful. Humanity is useful. Humanity is necessary. Humanity is burdened from the beginning. You stand in a workshop where clay is being mixed. Water darkens the earth until it becomes shapeable. Straw is folded through it. Hands press, turn, and lift. The scene feels strangely like creation itself. Human bodies, too, are imagined through clay in several ancient traditions, formed from earth and animated by forces beyond ordinary matter. To be human is to be both mud and breath, labour and longing. A quirky tidbit rests within this creation theme. Some myths involve divine blood or the essence of a slain deity mixed into the making of humanity. That detail has tempted many grand theories, some elegant, some rather dramatic in the candlelit basement sense. Yet even without exaggeration, the image is haunting. Humans are not just earth-shaped into workers. They contain something troublingly divine, something inherited through conflict. This makes the burden more complicated. If humans are only servants, why do they dream? If they are made for labour, why do they sing laments, love fiercely, fear death, question kings, and imagine the gods leaving? A tool does not mourn its maker. A basket does not ask why the field is dry. But humans do. They serve the system, yet they also suffer under the knowledge of serving it. Your feet carry you into a field at noon. The sun presses down like a hand. Barley bends in dry wind. Workers move along irrigation channels, checking the flow, cutting weeds, repairing weakened banks. A child brings water in a jar. The clay is cool against small fingers. Insects hum near the wet edge of the canal, far off. A temple platform shimmers in the heat. This is the burden made visible. Human beings hold back disorder every day. Not heroically in the loud sense, but repetitively. They repair, carry, count, sow, reap, bake, brew, weave, and bury. Their labour feeds households, institutions, armies, and gods. The world does not remain ordered because order is natural. It remains ordered because people repeat exhausting tasks before dawn notices them. The open scholarly debate remains careful here. Some researchers interpret the labour theme as a theological explanation for temple service and social hierarchy. Others argue that it reflects real tensions in early urban societies, where institutional demands shaped ordinary lives. Scholars at Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford continue to ask whether these myths comforted workers, justified exploitation, criticised divine authority, or preserved older memories of social strain. You hear a woman singing while she grinds grain. The song is quiet, almost hidden under the stone's rough rhythm. It may be practical, helping the body keep pace. It may be sorrowful. It may be nothing more dramatic than a tune caught from a neighbour. Yet it changes the scene. Labour is still labour, but the worker is not reduced to function. She adds voice where the system asks for output. That is humanity's quiet defiance. Not rebellion with banners, but meaning inside obligation. A brewer turns grain into drink for temple and household. A potter shapes clay into vessels that will outlast the hand. A scribe copies signs and accidentally preserves worlds. A mother teaches a child which canal edge is unsafe. A labourer shares a joke under a load too heavy for humour, and yet humour arrives anyway. The gods may have created humans to work, but humans turn work into culture. They make tools beautiful. They decorate seals. They give names to children. They hold festivals. They complain with style. They leave offerings not only because duty commands, but because fear, gratitude, hope, and habit become indistinguishable over generations. The system uses them, yet they fill the system with human texture. A small house appears at evening. Its doorway is low. The roof is flat. A lamp glows near a wall blackened by smoke. Inside, a family eats bread, onions, dates, and perhaps a little beer. The day's labour has not vanished, but it has been softened by sharing. Someone's hands are cracked. Someone is sleepy. Someone tells an old story badly, and another person corrects the details with unnecessary confidence. This, too, belongs to the hidden timeline. After divine nearness becomes uncertain, humanity does not simply inherit work, it inherits memory. People must remember the gods through ritual, remember rulers through inscriptions, remember debts through tablets, remember disasters through laments, remember ancestors through names, and remember the old order through stories. Labour feeds the body of the city. Memory feeds its soul. The temple service makes this clear. Offerings are not only meals for God, they are acts of continuity. Each loaf placed before a divine image says the bond still exists. Each vessel of beer says the household of the god remains active. Each folded garment says the sacred presence still has dignity among humans. Even if the gods are far away, people behave as though relationship can be maintained through care. There is tenderness in that, and also exhaustion. To be human in this vision is to serve powers greater than oneself without always understanding them. It is to live between clay and heaven, between canal mud and star signs, between hunger and offering, between mortality and stories of impossible rains. Humanity is small, yet indispensable, fragile, yet assigned cosmic maintenance. Not bad for creatures made from dirt, although the job description could have been clearer. You pause near a burial ground at the edge of settlement. The earth is quieter here. A jar, bead, bowl, or tool may rest with the dead depending on time, place, and custom. Death asks what labour cannot answer. If humans were made to work, what remains when the worker stops? Mesopotamian views of the afterlife could be sombre, shadowed, and restrained. Yet burial care suggests that the dead still belong to human concern. The burden does not end neatly. The living continue the offerings. The living remember the names. The living maintain the houses, fields, temples, and graves. Human purpose spreads beyond labour into loyalty. To serve the gods is one task. To preserve the dead, feed the young, and repair the world for another morning is another. Night settles over the fields. Frogs begin near the canal. Smoke rises from low roofs. The temple is dark except for a few lamps, and the stars appear above it like distant marks no scribe has finished reading. You feel the weight of humanity's role, not as a curse alone, but as a strange inheritance. Perhaps humans were made to carry what the gods no longer wish to carry. Perhaps, over time, they began carrying more than the gods intended. The language of the land begins to change. But the old clay does not fall silent. You stand at the edge of a world where Sumerian cities have already grown ancient to those who inherit them. New rulers speak different tongues. New capitals rise. New armies march across roads hardened by use and fear. Yet beneath the titles of later kings, beneath fresh seals and grander claims, the Sumerian memory is like writing under paint. Empires inherit ruins, but they also inherit questions. Akkadian rulers enter the scene with a wider hunger than the old city-states could easily contain. Their kings look beyond single canals, single walls, and single patron gods. They imagine power stretched across regions, tied together by soldiers, governors, tribute, scribes, and roads. The world becomes larger, louder, and more dangerous. Authority no longer rests only in the sacred memory of one city. It must travel, command, and be recognized far away. You hear boots on packed earth. Metal fittings catch the sun. Messengers move between provinces. Clay tablets pass through hands trained in more than one language. The smell of dust rises behind marching men. Somewhere, a local official bows with a face arranged for loyalty, which is to say, arranged for survival. Empires teach people many arts, and one of them is smiling carefully. A mainstream historical fact settles into this widening landscape. The Akkadian Empire, associated above all with Sargon of Akkad and his successors, is often described by modern scholars as one of the earliest territorial empires in Mesopotamian history. Researchers at Yale, Oxford, Chicago, and Harvard have studied how Akkadian rulers absorbed Sumerian administrative habits, religious titles, artistic forms, and literary prestige. Conquest did not erase Sumer, it repurposed Sumer. That repurposing matters. The gods of Sumer did not vanish when Akkadian power rose. Their names, cities, rituals, and stories continued, often translated, adapted, and joined to wider traditions. Inanna became closely associated with Ishtar. Enki became Ea. Sumerian hymns and myths entered scribal culture long after Sumerian ceased to be spoken as an everyday language. A dead daily language could remain sacred, scholarly, and powerful. Latin would later nod politely from far away. You walk through a scribal room in a later period. Students copy Sumerian words they may not speak at home. Their teachers preserve old compositions because antiquity carries authority. To know Sumerian is to touch origins. To copy old lists is to join a lineage of knowledge. To name ancient cities is to borrow their depth. The empire does not merely rule territory, it collects time. This is one way gods remain after leaving. They survive in curriculum. The Akkadian kings present themselves through older religious patterns but enlarge the scale. Naram-Sin, one of Sargon's successors, famously took divine honours in ways that later tradition remembered with unease. His image rises on a victory monument, helmeted with horns, standing above enemies, climbing toward the heavens. The visual message is difficult to miss, even for those pretending not to see it. A king has stepped closer to divinity, perhaps too close. A quirky tidbit enters with a royal confidence. Later Mesopotamian stories could portray Naram-Sin as a cautionary figure, a ruler whose pride or impiety helped bring disaster. Whether these tales preserve history or moral imagination is debated, but the theme is deliciously ancient. Every empire eventually invents a story about the executive who ignored the warning signs. Some traditions simply add gods and better costumes. The open scholarly debate around Akkadian collapse remains complex. Some researchers emphasize climate stress, including evidence for arid conditions in the late 3rd millennium before the Common Era. Others stress political rebellion, overextension, trade disruption, internal weakness, and the difficulty of ruling diverse regions. Scholars at Stanford, Yale, and Oxford continue to ask whether environmental pressure triggered collapse, intensified existing problems, or became part of later memory. You stand now in the dust after imperial certainty has cracked. Cities do not stop existing because one royal house falls. Local rulers return. Old cults continue. Scribes keep writing. Temples need repairs, as temples always do, with their quiet talent for requiring budgets. The 3rd dynasty of rises in this later landscape, drawing deeply on Sumerian heritage while managing an impressive bureaucratic state. It looks backward and forward at once. The kings of restore old forms with deliberate care. They build, standardize, record, and organize. Their inscriptions emphasize justice, divine favor, temple construction, and order. Their bureaucracy produces enormous numbers of administrative tablets, many concerned with labor, livestock, offerings, fields, and goods. It is as if a state tries to answer uncertainty by counting everything. This is understandable, if not especially restful. You enter under moonlight, where the great ziggurat rises in layered shadow. Its bricks hold both ambition and memory. The ruler who builds such a structure does not merely need a staircase for priests. He needs visible proof that the bond between heaven and city remains active. The platform lifts the sacred house above ordinary streets, not into the sky, but toward it. Yet also falls. Its lament remembers abandonment, invasion, and sorrow. That fall becomes one more cycle in the inherited pattern. The city that restores Sumerian order is itself broken. Human systems continue to imitate divine permanence, then reveal their clay. Later Babylonian and Syrian kings inherit the same problem and answer it with greater scale. Richer libraries, more formal law, stronger armies, and deeper fear of omens. Babylon reshapes the Sumerian inheritance through new theological centers. Marduk rises in importance, especially in Babylonian tradition, while older Sumerian gods remain woven into the broader pantheon. Creation stories are retold, divine hierarchy is rearranged. The old southern memories become part of a larger Mesopotamian treasury. Nothing is simply copied. Everything is placed into new order, because empires dislike loose ends almost as much as scribes dislike empty tablets. Assyria adds another sound to the inheritance, the sound of iron, horses, siege engines, royal annals, and libraries. Assyrian kings preserve ancient texts, while also conquering with terrifying efficiency. Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh would later hold copies of older Mesopotamian compositions, including stories whose roots reach deep into Sumerian and Babylonian tradition. The conquerors, oddly enough, become preservers. History enjoys these uncomfortable arrangements. A mainstream scholarly point becomes clear. Much of what is known about earlier Mesopotamian myth and literature survived because later scribes recopied older traditions in schools, temples, and royal libraries. Institutions connected to museums and universities in Britain, the United States, and Europe continue to study these tablets today. Without later imperial archives, many Sumerian echoes would be far quieter. You can feel the irony in the cool archive room. Empires that claimed eternity preserved the memories of older powers that also claimed eternity. Each empire stood among ruins, borrowed their symbols, and insisted this time the order would last. The tablets, patient and slightly unimpressed, waited for them all to become archaeology. The system reveal widens across centuries. Sumer gives sacred cities, divine kingship, temple economies, flood memory, laments, and mythic patterns. Akkad gives empire and royal expansion. Gives bureaucratic restoration and ceremonial continuity. Babylon gives theological reorganization. Assyria gives archival preservation and imperial terror wrapped in scholarship. Each inherits a world after the gods have become more remote, and each tries to make remoteness governable. Humanity's role changes with these empires, but the burden remains. Workers still build, scribes still copy, priests still serve, kings still claim favour, scholars still read signs. Only the scale expands. A local temple becomes part of a regional network. A city god becomes a figure in imperial theology. A royal inscription becomes a statement to conquered peoples, future rulers, and divine judges who are presumed to be paying attention. The ancient question does not disappear under imperial grandeur. It grows larger. If gods once walked close to cities, what happens when kings rule lands so vast they cannot know every shrine? can divine favour stretch across mountains, deserts, and foreign peoples? Can an empire truly hold sacred order, or does it merely collect the ruins of earlier certainties? Night settles over the imagined remains of many capitals. Akkad itself has not been securely located, which feels almost appropriate for a power that once seemed unavoidable. Ur stands in ruins. Babylon becomes memory and symbol. Nineveh's tablets are buried until modern excavation brings them back into light. The empires pass, but their copied words remain. You look at one tablet lying in a museum drawer. It may have been copied centuries after the tradition it preserves. It may carry a Sumerian story through Akkadian hands into a later library, then into modern scholarship. That journey is its own kind of afterlife. The gods are distant now, but their names have survived every throne that tried to own them. Perhaps empires did not replace the gods. Perhaps they became another way humans tried to manage the space the gods had left behind. A brush moves across baked clay with the gentleness of someone touching a sleeping animal. You are no longer standing in an ancient courtyard, but inside the slow labour of recovery. A table is lit by a clean white lamp. Cotton gloves rest nearby, though many specialists prefer careful bare hands when the object allows it. A fragment lies in a padded tray, broken at one corner, its signs crowded and faint beneath dust that has waited longer than kingdoms. Modern scholars rebuild the fragments, but not in the easy way stories sometimes pretend. There is no single heroic moment when a buried tablet suddenly explains everything while dramatic music politely rises. More often, there are drawers, catalogue numbers, uncertain readings, damaged signs, old excavation notes, photographs, joins between pieces, and the quiet ache of knowing that one missing wedge can alter an entire line. You stand beside an Assyriologist as they studies the surface. Their eyes move slowly, trained to recognise impressions made by reed on wet clay thousands of years earlier. Some signs are clear, others are broken, smeared, or partly lost. A sign may look like another sign when erosion has softened its edges. A word may belong to Sumerian, Akkadian, or a scholarly tradition where older language has become ritual and learned memory. Records confirm that the decipherment of cuneiform depended on generations of scholars comparing multilingual inscriptions, lexical lists, royal texts, and vast tablet collections. Researchers connected with Oxford, Yale, Chicago, Pennsylvania, and other major institutions continue to publish new readings, joins, and interpretations of Mesopotamian material. The work did not end when the script was first read. It keeps unfolding, sign by sign, drawer by drawer. The atmosphere is almost monastic, except with more catalogue spreadsheets. Clay fragments sit in foam supports. Digital photographs glow on screens. A microscope waits near a tablet whose surface is too delicate for unnecessary handling. The scholar rotates the light, because shadows reveal depth. A wedge that seemed absent appears when lit from one side. A phrase awakens because the angle changed. History sometimes depends on lamp placement, which feels both absurd and beautiful. A quirky tidbit belongs in this room. Some tablets preserve school exercises where ancient students copied signs, proverbs, and model texts, sometimes making mistakes that teachers corrected. Modern scholars can recognize clumsy hands, uneven lines, and repeated drills. In other words, part of humanity's great literary inheritance survives because someone did their homework badly enough to be interesting. The past has a sense of humour, even when wearing dust. You look at a fragment from a myth. It may contain a divine name, a broken verb, and the end of a line about a city, a storm, or a command. Alone, it is nearly mute. But another fragment in another museum may preserve the missing beginning. A third piece may belong to the same tablet, separated long ago by excavation, sale, storage, or accident. Scholars compare shape, clay colour, thickness, handwriting, and content to see whether broken pieces can be reunited. This process is called joining. but the word feels too simple. It is closer to listening for one voice in two ruined rooms. The broken edges must fit materially, yet the words must also fit logically. The script must belong to the same hand or workshop. The line spacing must match. The grammar must breathe correctly. When a join works, a little door opens in time. The open scholarly debate appears in every translation. Some researchers emphasize philological precision, warning against reading too much into damaged texts. Others explore wider cultural meaning, mythology, ritual politics, psychology, and social memory. Scholars at Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, and Chicago often disagree not because they are careless, but because fragments invite several responsible possibilities. Ancient clay is generous with uncertainty. It never over-explains itself. You can feel that uncertainty in the smallest mark. A divine name partly broken may change the speaker of a passage. A verb could mean leaving, sending, bringing, or placing, depending on context and grammar. A city name may be restored because a parallel text suggests it. But the restoration remains an educated proposal. Modern brackets in translations are little windows of humility. They say, "Here the clay is gone," and the scholar is carefully guessing. That careful guessing matters deeply for the question of divine departure. When texts speak of gods leaving cities, abandoning temples, withdrawing favour, or being carried away, each phrase must be weighed. Is it poetic grief, ritual language, political theology, memory of war, description of a cult statue removed by enemies, a metaphor for famine? The answer may shift from one text to another, and the responsible reader must resist turning every silence into one grand secret. Still, the pattern remains suggestive. Laments, myths, king lists, omen traditions, and later copies preserve repeated concern with distance between human institutions and divine will. Modern scholarship does not need to accept every myth literally to recognize the emotional architecture beneath it. The Sumerians and their inheritors imagined a world where sacred order could be received, maintained, lost, restored, and mourned. You enter a museum gallery where tablets sit behind glass. Visitors pass slowly, often too quickly to read labels in detail. A child presses close and sees only small brown objects with scratches. An adult leans in and tries to imagine a hand making those signs before iron became common, before alphabetic writing spread widely, before many later empires were even dreams. The tablet does not perform for them. It waits. Behind the public gallery, storage rooms hold far more. Thousands of tablets remain unpublished, partly studied or awaiting new imaging. Some are administrative records, some are letters, some are exercises, some are fragments of literature. The archive is not one library with a finished catalogue of answers. It is an enormous, uneven field of evidence still being harvested with patient tools. Technology has changed the work without replacing the human eye. High-resolution photography, three-dimensional scanning, and digital databases allow scholars to compare tablets across continents. A fragment in London can be matched to one in Philadelphia. A sign can be magnified without touching the clay. Old copies can be checked against new images. Yet interpretation still requires judgment, language skill, and the humility to say, perhaps. A mainstream fact emerges from this patient labour. Many ancient Mesopotamian texts are known only through later copies, especially from scribal schools and royal libraries. That means scholars must distinguish between the age of a story and the age of a manuscript. A myth may preserve older traditions, but the tablet itself may come from a later period. This layered transmission is not a flaw. It is how memory survives. You pause beside a broken tablet and notice the fingerprints. Sometimes ancient prints remain in clay, left by scribes, handlers, or workers before firing or drying. They are not always clear, and they rarely identify a person. Still, they are intimate. A fingertip pressed into clay can cross 4,000 years more directly than a king's boast. The unknown hand becomes briefly present. The reconstruction of Sumerian records is therefore not only technical, it is ethical. Scholars must avoid forcing fragments to say what modern desire wants them to say. They must respect damage, uncertainty, and the difference between mythic imagination and historical event. At the same time, they must not flatten ancient thought into dry inventory. The tablets held worlds of fear, devotion, humour, ambition, grief, and speculation. The room grows quiet as the lamp is turned off. The tablet remains in its tray. It has not confessed everything. It never will. Yet another sign has been read more clearly. Another join has been proposed. Another line of a lament or myth has recovered a little of its breath. Perhaps the gods left no final explanation. Perhaps they left fragments and trusted humans to keep listening. The pattern begins to show itself like a design beneath worn cloth. You do not see it all at once. It appears in pieces, in the way a city rises, shines, trembles, and falls. It appears in kingship descending, moving, vanishing, and returning. It appears in temples rebuilt over older temples, in laments sung over broken sanctuaries, in omens read when ordinary speech fails. Presence, withdrawal, collapse, reconstruction. The rhythm is ancient enough to feel almost natural. You stand on a mound at dusk, where centuries of ruined buildings have become a hill. Beneath your feet are floors no one sees, hearths no one warms, and walls that once held the smell of bread, wool, smoke, and sleep. Every layer below you was once a present moment. Every buried room once believed itself solid. The mound is not just archaeology. It is time made visible, time compacted into mud, brick, and ash. A city begins with confidence. People gather near water. Fields are measured. Houses multiply. A shrine becomes a temple. A platform rises. Names are written. Goods are counted. The gods are invited into rooms prepared with oil, cloth, and song. Kings speak of justice and construction. Workers clear canals. Children learn the streets. The city feels like an answer to chaos. Then strain gathers. It may begin with salt in fields, a shift in trade, rivalry between elites, a bad harvest, a weak ruler, a foreign army, a disease no one understands, or omens that make the palace uneasy. It may begin quietly enough that no one calls it collapse. People rarely live inside an era labelled decline. They live inside late deliveries, cracked walls, high grain prices, strange weather, unpaid labour, and neighbours who suddenly look worried. Records from ancient Mesopotamia confirm repeated cycles of urban growth, political centralisation, fragmentation, and restoration across many centuries. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, Stanford, and the University of Chicago have studied how environmental pressures or warfare, irrigation demands, trade, administration, and religious ideology shape these changes. No single cause explains every collapse. History is rarely that courteous. You walk through a marketplace in a city under pressure. The stalls are still active. A potter argues over payment. A woman chooses dates with practiced suspicion. A trader claims his measure is fair, which naturally means someone should check it. Life continues because it must. Yet small signs gather. A wall repair is delayed. A canal bank weakens. A temple official complains of reduced offerings. A soldier passes with dust on his cloak and no desire to answer questions. The gods may still be honoured, but anxiety changes the sound of worship. A hymn becomes more urgent. A festival becomes a request for reassurance. A royal inscription grows louder in praise, perhaps because reality has become harder to praise honestly. When institutions feel threatened, they often speak in grander tones. Ancient kings were not the last people to discover this strategy. A quirky tidbit follows the pattern of attempted protection. Mesopotamian ritual specialists sometimes use substitute figures, apotropaic objects, and protective ceremonies to divert evil or absorb danger. Small crafted forms could be placed in foundations, doorways, or ritual spaces. It is a tenderly strange idea that a little buried figure might stand guard while humans sleep above it. Tiny security staff, eternally on duty. The debate remains open around collapse and recovery. Some researchers argue that environmental stress, including drought or salinization, played decisive roles in particular periods. Others stress political decisions, military conflict, over-centralized administration, shifting alliances, or the fragility of irrigation societies. Scholars at Harvard, Chicago, and Oxford continue to warn against turning one region's crisis into a universal explanation. The pattern repeats, but the causes change their masks. You look at a fallen wall, the bricks have slumped back toward earth. Mud brick teaches the lesson without drama. It rises only through human care and falls when care is interrupted. Civilization is not a finished object, it is maintenance. This is not the sort of thing rulers put proudly in inscriptions, but it may be the truest sentence a ruin can offer. The pattern of leaving is not always divine first. Sometimes people leave before the gods do. A neighborhood empties, a canal route changes, a family moves toward better fields, a temple loses personnel, a shrine still stands, but fewer feet polish its floor. Absence begins domestically, with quieter streets and closed doors. Then later poetry may say the god departed, giving sacred language to a process that unfolded through human fear and necessity. Yet the sacred version is not false in its own world. For the people who sang those laments, abandoned houses and abandoned temples belong together. A god's withdrawal and a city's collapse were not separate categories. They were two ways of feeling the same fracture. The divine order had ceased to hold the place in safety. The city had slipped from the pattern. Then reconstruction begins, if conditions allow it. Someone clears debris, someone reopens a channel, someone molds new bricks, a ruler claims restoration, a priest resumes offerings, a scribe copies old texts so the correct words are not lost. The first repairs are practical, but they also carry a deeper message. The world may be wounded, yet order can be invited back. You stand near a rebuilding ceremony, fresh clay is cool beneath the hand, a brick mould waits. The ruler performs humility before the god, while officials ensure everyone sees it properly. Workers do the actual heavy lifting, because symbolic labour has always benefited from actual labour nearby. The ceremony says the bond is renewed. The wall rises not only as architecture, but as an argument against abandonment. This is where the cycle becomes almost unsettling in its resilience. Human beings do not stop after loss. They interpret loss, ritualize it, organize it, and build over it. They do not merely survive collapse. They make collapse part of memory. A ruined city becomes a lament. A restored temple becomes a boast. A broken dynasty becomes a warning. A flood becomes a dividing line in sacred time. The system of presence and withdrawal also shapes kingship. A ruler comes to power claiming divine favour. His success appears to confirm it. His failure invites doubt. When a dynasty falls, later traditions may explain that the gods had decreed its end. This does not remove politics. It sacralizes politics. It turns defeat into a sign that the unseen order has shifted elsewhere. You can imagine how comforting and frightening this must have been. Comforting, because disaster belongs to a pattern rather than empty chaos. Frightening, because the pattern may turn against anyone. No wall is secure forever. No title guarantees favour. No offering buys certainty permanently. The gods may bless, but they may also move on. The sky darkens over the mound. Below you lie many attempts at order. One settlement over another. One floor sealed beneath another. A child's bead, a broken bowl, a seal impression, a charred beam, an offering vessel. Each object belongs to a human effort to continue. Each also belongs to the vast quiet that follows continuation's failure. Perhaps this is the hidden timeline the records keep revealing. Not a single lost golden age, not one clean departure, not one secret answer carved in perfect lines. Instead, a rhythm. The gods draw near through cities, temples, kings, signs, and stories. Then certainty thins, structures weaken, disaster enters, humans mourn, humans rebuild, the sacred is invited again. And still, beneath every rebuilding, the possibility of another leaving remains. The question becomes quieter now. And because it is quieter, it becomes harder to escape. What remained in human beings when the gods no longer seemed near enough to answer plainly? Not in the temples only, not in royal inscriptions or learned omen rooms only. What remained in the body, in the night thoughts, in the ordinary pulse of people who still had fields to tend, children to feed, debts to fear, and dead relatives to remember. You stand inside a house after sunset. The walls hold the day's warmth. A lamp burns low near a bowl of oil. The floor has been swept, though fine dust returns with impressive determination. Outside, a dog barks once, then gives up whatever argument it was making. Inside, someone ties a cord around a storage jar. Someone else checks a sleeping child with the back of a hand. The great records speak of gods, kings, floods, omens, and cities. But human life gathers in smaller places. A doorway, a hearth, a bed mat, a family grave, a little figurine tucked somewhere for protection, a spoken blessing before a journey, a whispered complaint when the grain measure feels lighter than promised. These small acts are not outside history. They are where history becomes breathable. Records confirm that ancient Mesopotamian households used amulets, protective rituals, ancestor care, domestic shrines, and personal prayers alongside major temple religion. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, Chicago, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied letters, incantations, legal tablets, and archaeological finds that reveal a world of everyday piety. Religion was not only public ceremony, it entered sleep, childbirth, illness, travel, and fear. You feel that fear in a mother's hands as she places something near a doorway. The object is small, perhaps protective, perhaps meaningful in ways no label can fully recover. She's not composing theology. She's guarding a threshold. The night outside holds sickness, spirits, thieves, bad luck, and whatever else the world has not yet named. A mother does not need a formal doctrine to know that the vulnerable require defense. A quirky tidbit survives in the world of protection. Mesopotamian rituals sometimes use little figurines of fierce or hybrid beings placed in houses to ward off evil. Some were buried beneath floors or set near doors. The household, in other words, had supernatural security arrangements. Very ancient, very serious, and possibly more reliable than a sleepy cousin told to watch the gate. The open debate here is delicate. Some researchers interpret domestic ritual objects as evidence of popular religion distinct from temple practice. Others argue that household and temple traditions were deeply connected, sharing specialist symbols and prayers. Scholars at Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford continue to ask how ordinary people understood divine power when most surviving texts come from trained scribes and institutions. That last point matters. The tablets speak often in official voices because official voices had better access to clay, storage, and preservation. Ordinary emotion survives indirectly, through prayers, names, contracts, complaints, school exercises, burials, and the objects left in houses. To hear everyday people, you must listen sideways. History rarely hands them a microphone. It leaves a broken bowl and expects you to behave intelligently. You sit near the lamp as the family settles. A man murmurs a prayer for health. An older woman remembers a festival from her youth, when the streets were crowded and the statue of a deity moved through the city with music. A child asks whether gods can hear through walls. No tablet records the answer, but you can imagine the pause before someone replies. Adults have always needed gentleness when answering questions they cannot solve. What remained in humanity was memory, but not memory as a museum shelf. Living memory. Useful memory. The kind that tells you which prayer to say, which day feels dangerous, which ancestor should be honoured, which dream should be reported, which promise should not be broken. Memory becomes a soft technology for surviving uncertainty. It carries patterns when direct certainty is gone. Names preserve some of that inheritance. Many Mesopotamian personal names include divine elements expressing devotion, gratitude, protection, or a family's hope. A child might carry a god's name within their own, not as ornament, but as relationship. Every time the name is spoken, the divine is drawn into domestic life. Calling a child to supper can become a small act of theology, which is a lot of pressure for supper. Labour also preserves the gods. A brewer repeats old methods. A scribe copies a hymn. A farmer maintains a canal whose origin is wrapped in sacred order. A singer learns a lament. A jeweller shapes symbols recognised by generations. The gods remain not only as beings worshipped above, but as patterns embedded in skill. Culture is memory with hands. You walk into the night street. The moon sits low, bright enough to silver the edges of the mud brick. The canal smells cool and vegetal. Somewhere a door latch clicks. Somewhere a baby cries, then quiets. The city, even when anxious, continues through thousands of gestures too humble for royal inscriptions. These gestures are not less important because they are small. They are the reason any temple has worshippers. Any archive has meaning. Any king has subjects. Fear remained too, not panic, not always, but a background awareness that the world might shift without warning. A drought could come, a child could fall ill, a city could be attacked, a god could be offended, an omen could darken the palace. Ancient life did not require superstition to feel precarious. It had weather, disease, debt, and politics. Quite enough. Really? Longing remained beside fear. People longed for favour, protection, justice, fertility, health, remembrance, and peace with the dead. They longed for rulers who would not ruin everything, which is perhaps among humanity's oldest and most reasonable prayers. They longed for signs that the world still answered care with care. When signs failed, ritual continued anyway, because longing often works by repetition. A mainstream fact strengthens this quiet picture. Mesopotamian prayers and hymns often show individuals and communities appealing to deities for mercy, healing, guidance, and restoration. Modern scholars at major universities study these texts as evidence that ancient religion was not only mechanical obligation, but also emotionally rich devotion. The worshipper might be afraid, but fear did not exclude tenderness. You pause before a small household offering. It may be food, drink, incense, or a few words spoken in darkness. No grand procession surrounds it. No king appears. No scribe writes it down. Yet the act carries the same basic hope as the largest temple ritual. Relationship might still be possible. The unseen might still notice. Care might still travel upward. This is perhaps what remained most deeply in humanity after divine distance. Not certainty, but the habit of reaching. Humans kept reaching through song, work, naming, offerings, law, stories, burial, teaching, and rebuilding. They reached even when the answer was delayed. They reached even when a city fell. They reached even when tablets broke and names disappeared. The lamp burns lower. The house grows quiet. In the darkness, the sleeping child turns slightly, breathing against a folded cloth. Outside, stars gather over the roofs, remote and bright. The gods may have become stories, signs, patterns, fears, and names. But those things are not nothing. They shape how people wake, work, love, grieve, and sleep. Perhaps the gods remained in the spaces humans made for them. Perhaps absence became another kind of presence. The stars are fading above the plain, but the tablets have not finished speaking. You stand in the hour before dawn, when the world seems undecided about returning. The air is cool against your skin. A faint mist gathers near the canals. Reeds lean together in the dark water, whispering like old scribes sharing a secret they will not quite explain. Somewhere beyond the fields, a city mound rises from the earth. It is not grand now. It is low, broken, and patient. Yet beneath it lie streets where people once argued over grain, carried children, repaired doorways, and watched smoke rise from temple courtyards. Beneath it lie rooms where offerings were prepared, names were written, songs were practiced, and fears were given form. Beneath it lie the remains of a question humanity never put down. What happened after the gods left? The records do not answer like a door opening. They answer like wind moving through many damaged rooms. One tablet says kingship came from heaven. Another says a city's god departed. Another remembers floodwater covering the land. Another lists rulers whose reigns stretch beyond human sense. Another teaches a student how to write the old signs. Another counts sheep, oil, labourers, and barley with the calm patience of administration. Together they do not give a single secret. They give a pattern. A mainstream historical fact remains firm beneath the dream-like surface. The Sumerians helped create some of the earliest known cities, writing systems, temple institutions, and literary traditions in world history. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, Chicago, Stanford, and the University of Pennsylvania continue to study their tablets, architecture, seals, and settlement remains. Their work shows that Sumer was not myth floating freely in darkness. It was a human world, built from mud, grain, labour, ritual, and memory. Yet the human world they built kept looking beyond itself. It looked upward to heaven, downward to hidden waters, backward to impossible rains, and inward to anxiety. The Sumerians imagined civilization as something received, not merely invented. The powers of rule, craft, music, writing, lament, justice, and temple service belonged to an order older than any living person. Humanity did not begin as master. Humanity began as caretaker. You walk slowly across the mound as dawn light begins to grey the eastern sky. Bits of pottery crunch softly underfoot. A broken brick shows the impression of straw. The surface is plain, but every fragment has passed through hands. Someone shaped it, someone carried it, someone used it, someone forgot it. Then earth covered it with the impartial kindness of time. A quirky tidbit lingers near the end of the story. Many ancient tablets survived not because anyone planned to preserve them forever, but because fire hardened them, rubbish pits protected them, or later ruins sealed them away. Destruction sometimes became preservation. A burned archive could outlast a peaceful one. History, in one of its more unsettling jokes, occasionally protects memory by ruining the house around it. The final scholarly debate remains open as it should. Some researchers read the divine departures and city laments as poetic theology shaped by political collapse. Others see them as ritual language for restoring broken sanctuaries. Still others emphasize social memory, trauma, environmental pressure, and the shifting authority of kings and temples. Scholars disagree because the evidence is rich, damaged, layered, and alive with more than one meaning. That uncertainty is not failure. It is the proper atmosphere of ancient history. You pause before the entrance to an excavated room. The walls rise only knee-high, but your mind restores them gently. A roof of reeds, a lamp near the corner, a low table, a tablet drying on a shelf. Perhaps a scribe sat here, copying old words about gods who had withdrawn from cities, or kings who claimed favour, or floods that ended one age and began another. Perhaps he was bored. Perhaps he was afraid of making a mistake. Perhaps he never imagined strangers would one day search his lines for the shape of a vanished world. The hidden timeline does not end with the gods disappearing in one dramatic moment. It is stranger than that. Divine nearness becomes ritual. Ritual becomes institution. Institution becomes archive. Archive becomes ruin. Ruin becomes evidence. Evidence becomes interpretation. Interpretation becomes the soft voice in the dark, telling you that humanity has always lived among powers it could not fully understand. The gods left, perhaps by becoming less visible and more necessary. They left the streets, but remained in the city plan. They left direct speech, but remained in omens. They left obvious presence, but remained in statues, names, dreams, and sacred duties. They left certainty, but remained in longing. Their absence did not empty the world. It made the world harder to read. You can feel that difficulty in every survival. A king needs divine approval because power alone feels thin. A priest repeats ritual because silence must be met with order. A worker carries bricks because the temple must stand, even if heaven is quiet. A mother places protection near a doorway because love refuses to accept an unguarded night. A scholar studies a broken sign because the past still asks to be heard. Perhaps this is the most human part of the Sumerian records. They do not show people living beneath easy answers. They show people maintaining connection when connection is uncertain. They build houses for gods who may withdraw. They sing laments for cities that may not return. They copy stories whose origins are already ancient. They create systems of memory strong enough to carry doubt. The sky lightens further. Birds begin moving in the reeds, somewhere. Imagined water touches the bank with a sound like a slow breath. The mound does not explain itself, it simply remains. Beneath it, countless lives have become layers. Beneath those layers, the old question waits without impatience. What happened after the gods left? Maybe kings tried to speak louder. Maybe priests guarded silence with ceremony. Maybe workers carried the burden into fields and workshops. Maybe scribes turned absence into tablets. Maybe cities became vessels for divine memory. Maybe stories became the houses where gods could still be found when temples crumbled. Perhaps the gods did not leave the way a traveller leaves a road. Perhaps they withdrew into pattern, memory, and need. Perhaps they became the shape behind human order, felt most strongly when that order failed. Perhaps every ruined temple, every copied myth, every lament, and every offering preserves not proof of abandonment, but the ache of relationship across distance. You look once more toward the fading stars. They're almost gone in daylight, yet they have not ceased to exist. They are simply hidden by another brightness. The Sumerian records feel like that. They do not give the complete sky. They give small lights, partly obscured, still burning behind the morning. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. The plain grows softer now. The air warms by the smallest degree, and the canals lie quiet beneath the first pale colour of morning. You do not need to solve the tablets tonight. You do not need to decide whether every ancient line is memory, poetry, ritual, politics, or dream. Let the possibilities settle like dust in a room where no one is asking you to hurry. The people of Sumer are gone, yet their care remains. Their hands pressed clay. Their feet crossed courtyards. Their voices rose in temples, houses, fields, and schools. They feared silence, but they answered it with rhythm. They feared loss, but they answered it with memory. They feared abandonment, but they answered it by preparing rooms for return. So let your own room grow quiet. Let the distant rivers become only a murmur. Let the mud brick walls fade into shadow. Let the reed beds bend under moonlight that is no longer sharp. Somewhere, a lamp is being lowered. Somewhere, a tablet cools after firing. Somewhere, a temple door closes softly, not with finality, but with patience. The gods are distant now, but the night is gentle. The old cities sleep beneath their mounds. The workers sleep beside their tools. The scribes sleep with inkless hands and clay dust beneath their nails. The rivers move on, slow and dark, carrying silt, memory, and the faint reflections of stars. You may rest too. Nothing ancient demands an answer before morning. The unanswered things can remain unanswered. The hidden patterns can remain hidden. And far away, under the soft earth of Mesopotamia, the tablets wait without fear, holding their broken lines until another listener leans close. End of script. Good night.